Chapter 1413. After Zhang Yan slashed out the sword light, he did not stop. Instead, he followed up with another punch. Kong Yin held the initiative after all. He could change his roots and fruits at any time. Lu Ming had to take advantage of the opportunity to launch an attack before Kong Yin could do so. The sword ray was extremely fast. Even though it was separated by a vast expanse of space, it still arrived in a flash. Kong Yin's body was protected by a protective treasure, but it was unable to block the killing sword. Wherever the sword ray passed, his avatar would be sliced into pieces. In an instant, the left half of his body was reduced to specks of light. Despite suffering such a heavy injury, his expression was still as calm as ever. Spiritual light could be seen gathering outside, and the places that had been destroyed were recovering. However, the sword ray continued to slash at them. Ever since he reached the third stage of the mortal metamorphosis realm, it had been a long time since he had considered how to defend himself. This was because no matter what kind of attack he received, his past and future avatars would receive it. However, he did not expect that his roots and fruits would be so easily found by his enemies. Fortunately, before he reached this stage, he had also forged protective treasures. Just when the sword light was about to cut his right shoulder and half of his head, there were wisps of white mist floating around his body, blocking the rest of the sword light. Soon, the scattered spiritual light gathered in one place, and the Dharma body recovered at an extremely fast speed. However, before it could completely merge, an extremely powerful force violently smashed over with a rumble. The white fog was unable to block it and was immediately blasted apart. Moreover, the limbs and body that had clearly been formed earlier had once again collapsed under this impact. Seeing this, Zhang Yan increased the intensity of his attacks. At this point, there was no longer any need for him to hide his divine arts. With the circulation of his magic power, Qingxian High Sky Thunder Shock directly exploded around Kong Yin. At the same time, the avatars of his origin fetus appeared in the air. Clearly, in consideration of his backup plan, he did not summon all 12 avatars at once. Instead, he only summoned 9. Even so, it was already shocking enough. This meant that before he shed his mortal body, he had at least broken through the 9 barriers. After he became immortal, each of his clones also became a real mortal. This kind of method was only suitable for this kind of situation. Not to mention those people who had severed their past or future, even if they met a second-stage realm cultivator, if they couldn't find the root of the problem, no matter how many doppelgangers they had, it would be useless. After the 9 avatars appeared in the air, they immediately spread out and used their own techniques to attack Kong Yin. For a time, lightning and sword light filled the void like countless stars exploding in the sky. However, he also knew that as a third-stage cultivator, Kong Ying's root fruit had already evolved. Unlike a first-stage cultivator, who could break the root fruit once he found it, Kong Yin could wander between the past and the future. Currently, he was only dealing with one part of it. However, it was impossible for him to kill Kong Yin in this manner. Fortunately, every time he hit this person, he would lose a bit of his origin energy, so it wasn't like he didn't gain anything. Kong Yin only managed to defend himself a few times before he realized that he couldn't defend against the storm of attacks. In the end, he simply gave up and allowed his avatars to be destroyed, but he didn't stop trying to deduce Fan and Dong's root fruit. Losing one's origin energy was undoubtedly a great loss, but in the long run, this was undoubtedly the right move. Zhang Yan felt that it was a pity. If not for the fact that his divine will was obstructed and he couldn't communicate with the Zhuzhen, with the two of them working together, he might have been able to force Kong Yin to use all his strength to defend himself, causing him to give up on his original goal. Fortunately, it wasn't that he didn't have any other tricks up his sleeves. He took a step back and circulated his magic power. Flames soared behind him and gradually condensed into a tall demonic image. As time passed, it became clearer and clearer, as if it was about to come to life. Kong Ying's heart couldn't help but palpitate. Once again, he felt the same sense of danger as before. At this moment, the body of the past and the future that he used to fight against Zhang Yan was already in tatters. All that was left was a ball of scattered spiritual light. It couldn't stop his opponent, so he only had 2 choices left. One was to immediately change the location of his root fruit and avoid the attack. However, to do so, he would need to use a large amount of divine will from elsewhere, and he wouldn't have any spare energy to deduce Fan and Dong's root fruit. Right now, he was so close to success. If he pulled back now, all his previous efforts would be wasted. Not only that, if the two of them escaped, not only would all his previous efforts be in vain, but they would also pose a greater threat to him. The other way was to endure this attack and deal with Fan Xian and Dong Xuebing before dealing with them. He was very decisive. After thinking about it, he immediately chose the second option. Although the demonic image made him feel that something was wrong, he didn't think that it could kill him in a short amount of time. Because there was no external obstruction, Zhang Yan circulated his magic power to the maximum, and the demonic image behind him quickly solidified. With a thought, the demonic image slowly raised its body and deeply inhaled the scattered spiritual light of the Dharma body. At this moment, Kong Ying felt that his spirit was floating and shaking, as if it was about to be sucked out. Not only that, even his divine will was being consumed at a faster rate. He couldn't help but frown. If this continued, not only would he not be able to deduce the root fruit, he might not even be able to maintain his body of the past and the future. However, he didn't panic because of this. In an instant, he stimulated more spiritual qi and spiritual opportunity. At the cost of consuming his origin qi, he instantly strengthened his divine will. Although it wasn't enough to change the root fruit, it was enough to deal with the current situation. Zhang Yan didn't expect to be able to pull out Kong Ying's spirit this time. After all, Kong Ying's Dao foundation was deep, and he wouldn't be easy to deal with. If he had enough time, he might be able to do it, but by then, Kong Ying would have already dealt with the rest of his troubles. Fortunately, after his strength body was almost complete, the demonic image wasn't as strong as before. It stopped sucking and slowly blew out a breath of air. The moment the air came out, it instantly entered the spiritual light of Kong Ying's Dharma body. Although Kong Ying was aware of all this, his Dharma body had already collapsed, so he couldn't stop it. He could only let Kong Ying do what he wanted for the time being. After about 100 breaths, Kong Ying's eyes moved. He had already deduced the location of Taoist Fan's root fruit, so he immediately waved his sleeve and shot out a ray of white light. Caught off guard, Taoist Fan's Dharma body was instantly destroyed. Although it happened suddenly, under the condition of severing his mortal heart, he was still unusually calm. It wasn't hard to guess that his root fruit had already been found, or else the attack wouldn't have landed on him. At this point, he knew that he couldn't escape, so he stretched out his remaining hand and pointed at his ancestral aperture. In that instant, all of his essence qi origin qi was rapidly consumed, but his divine will rapidly expanded. It spread outwards and collided with Kong Ying's divine will. Even if he died, he wanted to exhaust his opponent as much as possible. Not only would this give Taoist Dong a chance to escape, but it would also give the 9 provinces a greater chance of defeating this person. Although he used all of his strength, due to the difference in their cultivation, his attack didn't even shake Kong Ying. Under the attack of the rainbow light from the outside and the exhaustion of his own quintessence, it only took 10 breaths of time before his entire body turned into blazing spiritual flames and dispersed. After another short moment, a profound void nether hole appeared at the place where he died, and it swallowed everything in its surroundings. Seeing that Taoist Fan was dead, Kong Ying's past and future body immediately dissipated, and the divine will that had been placed there was also freed. The situation that could only be maintained by a hair's breadth was instantly stabilized, and then he turned his attention to Taoist Dong. At this point, there was no one who could stop him. After a short while, he deduced the location of Taoist Dong's root fruit. Not long after, Taoist Dong also followed in Taoist Fan's footsteps. After dealing with these two people, he finally turned around and prepared to focus all of his strength on dealing with Zhang Yan. He first used his divine will, and not long after, he changed the location of his root fruit. But at this moment, he suddenly discovered that his spirit seemed to have been tainted by something, and this thing was continuously spreading towards the past and the future. The parts that it had invaded seemed to no longer belong to him. He could not help but narrow his eyes. He understood that this was a trick that Zhang Yan had set up just now. After a brief examination, he discovered that if he could meditate in seclusion, he might be able to expel this thing, but this was only a possibility. He was also very decisive. When he realized that he was unable to do this, he immediately took out a hand seal, and an illusory figure walked out from his body. He then extended a finger and pointed at it. The illusory figure swayed and instantly disappeared. As he did this, his own aura clearly weakened a little. This was a remarkable technique that he used to cut off a certain part of his tainted past. What was cut off was not only his essence chi and his lifespan, but also all the experiences and memories that should have existed in this part. Even if he had refined any treasures or derived any remarkable techniques during this period of time, it would be wiped clean along with this part of the past, and it would no longer belong to him. Although he had paid a great price, he had completely cut off the hidden danger. At this time, as the root of the fruit fell, his Dharma body once again reformed, and the sword, light, thunder, and fire that came from afar only passed through his body, and could not hurt him in the slightest. Zhang Yan saw all of this, but his expression did not change, and he continued to divide his attention to deduce the location of the root of the fruit. In his heart, he knew that following the deaths of Fan and Dong, only his side was still trapped in the changes of the future and the past. As long as Kong Ying forced out the root of the fruit and killed him, then the chances of victory for the side of the 9 continents would become extremely slim. From the looks of it, it was only a battle between 2 people, but in reality, it was the key to deciding the outcome of this battle. If he could withstand it, then there was hope for this battle. If he was defeated, then with this corner destroyed, the whole situation might also collapse. However, it was not that he did not know how to fight back. As long as a cultivator could calculate the root of the opponent once, then it would be easier to find the second time, even if the opponent was a 3rd-stage cultivator. Moreover, he had the remnant of the jade in his hand, so the calculation would only be faster. Based on this, it was not impossible for him to fight the opponent. Chapter 14:14. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Speak Net, providing you with exciting novels to read. Kong Yin's body glowed brightly, and his aura gradually grew stronger. This was the result of his past body gathering more divine wills, and gradually moving towards the perfect state of his true body. Naturally, his strength would inevitably grow. Zhang Yan watched calmly. The stronger the opponent's divine will, the easier it was for him to calculate the root fruit. He could feel that in at most half an hour he would be able to find the root fruit again. At this time, he shook his shoulder and withdrew the clones that were scattered outside. Just now, he only needed to attack, and he could release the clones to help. Now that Kong Yin had the root fruit to defend, no matter how many people attacked, it would be useless. If he was not careful, his magic power would scatter them, and he would instead use up some of his vitality. Not long after, Kong Yin's aura stabilized and finally stopped rising. He looked forward, and at the same time, the 4 Dharma treasures floating around him seemed to have received an order. Each of them glowed, and with a slight tremble, they flew out together. Yuliangism had conquered everywhere in Junqian realm, and after thousands of years, they had destroyed many large sects and collected many true treasures. However, there were not many who were willing to submit to this religion. Most true spirits would rather be sealed and destroyed than betray their masters. In the end, Kong Yin only obtained 2 offensive treasures. The other 2, including Xian Yuli, were originally things that Yuliangism already had. Of these 4 Dharma treasures, Zhang Yan had only seen Xian Yuli before. He had not seen the others, and because he did not know what they were used for, he did not rashly use his divine abilities. After all, the power of true treasures was not ordinary, and with the divine will of a mortal transformation cultivator infused into them, there would be many more mysterious changes. He stretched out his hand, and a boundlessly large hand condensed from profound energy instantly appeared in the sky. It blotted out the sky and blotted out the sun, and its 5 fingers spread open before it stretched forward and instantly enveloped the 4 treasures within it. This divine ability could be considered a method of combining strength. If one did not know the way to break it, there was no way to break it. It was perfect to use it as a test. The three magic treasures collided head-on with this hand, and instantly, light overflowed in all directions. Even though there was no sound in the sky, it produced numerous magnificent dazzling lights that flickered indeterminately. Obviously, the collision was extremely intense. However, one of the treasures suddenly turned into a wisp of smoke and easily passed through his palm. Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes slightly. He could see clearly that this treasure seemed to be illusory and had no substance. It was almost invisible and could not be blocked by ordinary means. With a thought, he used the mysterious revolving heavenly net wall. A layer of glazed barrier immediately appeared on his body. The smoke came over and drilled into it. However, it did not come out for a long time, as if it had been moved to another domain. When Kong Ying saw the giant hand blocking their path, he immediately used his divine will to calculate the weakness of this technique. In the next instant, he pointed a finger at the divine hand in front of him, and the great mystery giant hand was actually pierced through by an invisible force. There was no longer any obstruction in front of the three transcendent artifacts, and they immediately passed through. Previously, his attention was divided in many places, so he was unable to use his full strength. Now, he only needed to focus on one person, and he could display his true ability. No matter what kind of divine ability or technique his opponent used, as long as he used his divine will to calculate, he would be able to see through some of the flaws and weaknesses. In reality, this was not a skill that was unique to him. There were all kinds of divine abilities in this world. After a cultivator saw one, as long as they went back and pondered for a period of time, they would always be able to find a way to deal with it. And for ordinary cultivators, even if a long period of time passed in the divine will, it would only be an instant in the outside world. This was equivalent to giving them enough time to prepare. As a result, in battles between cultivators of this generation, those with a full divine will would have the upper hand. Kong Ying himself was a stage 3 cultivator, so his divine will could be said to be incomparably abundant. Compared to those whose cultivation was lower than his advantage was not just a little bit. Zhang Yan had previously used his large hand to block, so he already knew that these three magic treasures were purely offensive weapons. As a result, this time, he was not polite. Relying on his body of strength, he allowed two of the magic treasures to hit him. With a thought, he released a ray of water element true light. In an instant, a wave of water surged, and with just a single rush, the Xian Yuli was sucked in. As for the other one, the reason he didn't suck it in was because he was afraid he wouldn't be able to suppress it. If it was forcefully pulled out, it would instead be bad. As long as there was a chance, he could split them up and absorb them one by one. When Kong Ying saw Xian Yuli being absorbed, he felt that the mental connection between him and the treasure had suddenly become incomparably weak, as if it could be severed at any time. As a result, he tried to summon it, but he was unable to summon it back. He knew that this divine ability was not simple. This time, he didn't make any more calculations. From the surface, he could see that as long as the magic treasures were fast enough, they would be able to escape from the water light. Thus, he sent out a command, and the two magic treasures immediately moved far away. They turned into light and circled around. It seemed that unless there was a good opportunity, they wouldn't easily get close. At this time, Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. With a shake of his sleeve, hundreds and thousands of Qingxian high sky lightning shock instantly exploded on Kong Ying's protective treasure light. Just now, he once again divined the location of the root fruit. Kong Ying's avatar shattered and reformed in the lightning. He was able to see a sliver of the future, so he had already sensed it beforehand. However, this time, he didn't change the root fruit in advance. This was because, although he could protect himself by dodging first, the opponent's divine will would similarly be reduced. This meant that the opponent would have more time to deal with him. As for the avatar being bombarded by the divine ability, the loss of vitality was still bearable for him. What he possessed was a much larger amount of vitality compared to ordinary mortal metamorphosis cultivators, as well as the vast divine will derived from it. Just this point alone was enough to give him a huge advantage. Even without any strategies or schemes, he could still rely on this to grind his opponent to death. Zhang Yan's attack only lasted for 2 or 3 breaths before he saw that Kong Ying's avatar had completely recovered. There were no longer any fluctuations, so he knew that the root fruit had dodged again. He stopped and tried to deduce again in his mind. Kong Ying's eyes flickered. He could naturally sense Zhang Yan's actions, but he was slightly surprised by his opponent's perseverance. It was unwise to compete with him in terms of divine will. If the divine will was used up, even if the cultivator had the root fruit, it would be useless. Against the opponent, the cultivator could only wait for death. However, as he thought of this, he suddenly realized that Zhang Yan had both strength and strength. With the protection of the body, even if the divine will was used up, he could still preserve his life. Not only that, as long as there was something that could replenish the vitality, such as the pure purple Lingqi, the divine will could be nurtured again. Since the cultivators of the 9 continents had crossed the boundary to attack, they must have made ample preparations. The pure purple Lingqi they brought with them was probably not a small amount. Is this what you're relying on? His expression became colder and colder. To kill a cultivator who cultivated the path of strength, one must first break through their physical body. Otherwise, there was nothing he could do. Years ago, in order to deal with the dragon god, he had prepared many treasures. Although some of them were used up, he still kept some. With a thought, a long silver pole flew out. At first glance, it looked like it was made of black ice. It was cold and hard, and there were thin chains on it. This was the cold firmament dragon binding pole. It could be used to bind people with strong physical strength. Originally, there were 108 pairs of poles, but after the battle with the dragon god, more than half of them were destroyed. Now, there were only 36 pairs left. However, in his eyes, Zhang Yan was not any easier to deal with than the dragon god. Thus, he shook his sleeve and took out another object. It looked like a small ball that could be held in one hand. It looked like it was made of lightning, dazzling and dazzling. It seemed like it could explode at any time. However, it was bound together by the spiritual energy. It spun rapidly and did not seem to be moving in one direction. Instead, it seemed like it was moving in different directions, which was very contradictory. This was the Tai lightning bead. As long as it chased after the opponent's chi, it would not stop until it was exhausted. It was originally prepared for the dragon god, but it was not used in the end. Now, it was time to use it here. He did not use it immediately. Cultivators who cultivated the path of strength had a recovery ability that was hard to match. Before that, he wanted to weaken the opponent as much as possible. He made a hand sign and a ray of light flew out from between his brows. The void was filled with spiritual light. He had used the profound heavy breath technique. Zhang Yan had experienced this technique before, so he understood that his opponent still had another technique that could stop him from escaping. Thus, he did not dodge or evade. Instead, he expanded his baleful qi, which resembled a blazing flame, to block the spiritual light. Seeing that Zhang Yan was defending himself, Kong Ying waved his sleeves and stopped the void ruler technique. Then, his eyes shone brightly and he looked at Zhang Yan. At the same time, a huge wave of divine will shrouded him. Looking at him, Zhang Yan felt his vision blur. Then, he looked around and saw that he was standing in the void. Countless nebulae revolved around him. Mysterious caves came alive and died, then came back to life. At the same time, a huge wave of divine will shrouded him. From the looks of it, he had actually left the Junshin world and arrived at the void essence sea. With just a thought, a divine will converged with him. He immediately understood that this was a scene that Kong Ying had experienced in the past. This was the mind-illuminating spirit technique. It forcefully illuminated the past into the opponent's divine will. Those who were shrouded by this technique could only find the right way out. If they did not, they would harm themselves. This technique was called mind reflection of spirit. It forcefully reflected the past into the opponent's divine will. Those who were shrouded by this technique could only find the correct way to escape. If their cultivation was not good enough, they would harm themselves and die. Because it was based on his past experiences, there was also a lot of his knowledge of the Great Tao. There were even some of his experiences on the path of cultivation. If those who were weaker than him could comprehend it, it would undoubtedly be very beneficial to their future cultivation. However, the cultivator who was shrouded by this technique would only think of a way to escape. They would not care about these things. If they were greedy, they would fall into Kong Ying's trap. They would be unable to extricate themselves. Most importantly, he only needed a strand of divine will to manifest this technique. Those who were shrouded by it would have to pay more if they wanted to escape. If they walked the right path every time, they might need to use less. However, if there was a slight deviation, they would need to use 10 times or even 100 times more. This might not seem logical, but this was the advantage that those with higher cultivation had. It was like the flow of a river. The water from the tributaries could only flow with the waves and could not control themselves. Chapter 14-15. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go? Speak, net. Provide you with wonderful novels to read. Zhang Yan examined the void of the past for a long time. He knew that if he wanted to leave this place, he would have to follow the path that Kong Ying had taken all those years ago and find the final destination. Otherwise, he would be trapped here forever. However, there were so many mysterious caverns in the void primordial sea, and each one could be said to be a domain of its own. As for where Kong Ying was headed to, he would have to rely on the wisp of past divine will that he had left behind in this space to deduce. He found that as time passed, the strand of divine will gradually faded. Clearly, he wanted to find the right way out as soon as possible. He smiled slightly. If he really did use divine will to calculate, then even if he could break the technique, it would be a great loss of vitality. Even if he had the pure violet spirit chi to replenish his lost vitality, it was limited. If the battle dragged on for too long, then the variables would increase. Anything could happen, so he could only use it at the most critical moment. He sat down cross-legged and sent a portion of his consciousness into the broken jade to try to calculate. At the same time, he looked around. What he saw was something that Kong Ying had experienced in the past. But generally speaking, mortals would not casually enter the void essence sea unless they had a special purpose, much less a sect leader like Kong Ying. Either this person had shed his mortal skin, and then attempted to break through the world to observe the transformations of the void, or he had come out to search for something. Perhaps, after learning that great demon Tru Yang had entered the misty wasteland realm, he hadn't known about the existence of the mountain and sea realm, so he had gone into the vital sea of the void to search for a suitable place to live. The first possibility was not high. At that time, Kong Ying had just reached mortal transformation, and his cultivation was far below his current level. There was no way he could have trapped him. The second possibility was the most likely. Of course, this was only his own speculation. As for the truth, if Kong Ying did not say it, it would be difficult for others to know. After a long time, he finished his calculations and found the place he should go. He turned into a beam of light and flew toward one of the Xian caves. He felt his body become heavy, as if it were being crushed by an immense force. This was not something he felt himself, but rather something he had experienced with Kong Ying. This feeling was enough to prove that he had not gone the wrong way. After passing through the boundary pass of heaven and earth, he discovered that there was no distinction between yin and yang, and the qi activity was chaotic. It was truly an evil world. The qi of the true evil realm was not separated into yin and yang, and it was also mixed with filth. Cultivators would usually avoid it, and even ordinary cultivators could cause a certain degree of harm. However, everything here was just a manifestation of Kong Ying's supernatural power. Although it could trap him, it could not affect him, so there was no need to pay attention to it. He glanced around. Since this wasn't the exit, it meant that he had to continue walking. He could only leave after completing this experience. Thus, he stood on the spot and continued to deduce. After a while, he leaped out and instantly broke open the heaven and earth door and rushed down. After that, he passed through more than 10 void realms in a row. Most of them were evil realms, and none of them could accommodate cultivators. Because he had always been walking on the correct path, he was observing everything in the outside world with Kong Yin's eyes. This was also a rare experience. However, as he continued to travel, he unexpectedly sensed that Kong Yin's cultivation was actually improving as well, and he couldn't help but feel slightly interested. If Kong Ying could increase his cultivation level in the Void Essence Sea, then it meant that his previous judgment was wrong. Kong Ying might not have been hiding from the Almighty, but had broken out to cultivate. However, after some careful observation, he discovered that Kong Ying did not cultivate any technique, but had been injected with some external medicine. From the looks of it, there were no external medicines that could help ordinary cultivators cultivate that could compare to the clear purple spiritual qi, unless it was the great medicine that was refined from purple qi. The Junqian realm was not like the 9 continents, which had long since declined. The later generations had almost used up the legacy of their ancestors, but the realm was still rising, so it was entirely possible that there was such a thing. Zhang Yan's thoughts turned. Right now, Yuliangism or even the Qi Accumulation Palace might still have these things. If he could get rid of Kong Ying, then the Junqian realm would no longer be a threat to the mountain and sea realm. Perhaps he could try to search for them in the future. He followed Kong Ying's qi and flew back and forth in the Void Essence Sea. After an unknown amount of time, he seemed to have decided to return. He suddenly felt a divine will break through the endless barriers, and suddenly stared at one place. Then, everything in front of him flew by quickly, and finally, he arrived at a place that seemed familiar. He immediately recognized that this was the Junqian realm. It was obvious that this was the end. Although Kong Ying had tried hard, he could not find anything in the end. However, what was worth noting was that this person had found his way back so easily, as if he did not need to look for the way. He realized that this was very likely the method used by a third-stage mortal transformation cultivator to see through the chaos barrier. Right now, his cultivation level was not high enough, so he could not understand the mysteries behind it. However, he firmly remembered this experience. He took a step forward, and the surrounding world suddenly shattered. He had already broken out of Kong Ying's divine ability and returned to the real world. In that past realm, he had passed through at least 20 void realms. Fortunately, he had the broken jade in his hand. If he had used his own divine will to calculate and come out, he would have used up all his energy. At this moment, he suddenly saw a dozen bright silver pillars of ice flying towards him. It was Kong Ying who had used the heart-illuminating spirit. Just now, it seemed like a long time had passed in the divine ability, but in the outside world, only 1 or 2 breaths had passed. Seeing this, he quickly formed a hand seal, and drops of Xianming heavy water appeared around him, flying back and forth. When the pillars of ice came in front of him, they were knocked away, unable to get close. At this moment, the pillars of ice turned, and silver chains were undone. Like long snakes, they extended towards where he was standing. The chains' movements were strange and very agile. This time, the Xianming heavy water was unable to stop it. Zhang Yan stood still. Just as the silver chains were about to reach him, rays of red light suddenly exploded from his body. It was like a blossoming fire lotus, scorching and dazzling. Every chain that got close to him had a layer of spiritual vigor peeled off, and many of them were burnt and broken. Only a few of them managed to escape, but they retreated in a panic. He was a cultivator of both strength and strength. If the enemy used a technique to deal with strength, he could use the divine ability of Qi to counter it. Of course, if he had used up all his spirit in the divine ability just now, causing his Dharmakaya to be weakened, then he could only use pure strength to counterattack. Kong Ying was slightly surprised. According to his judgment, after Zhang Yan went for a spin in his divine ability, it was a small matter for him to exhaust his spirit. At the very least, his vitality should be greatly damaged. But now, it seemed that he still had some strength left. He originally wanted to use his divine ability to check on what Zhang Yan was doing just now. But when he thought about the huge shadow behind the ladder, it might cause unnecessary damage. After thinking about it seriously, he gave up on the idea. With a flick of his sleeve, the Tai Thunder Pearl turned into countless lightning and passed through the layers of Xianming heavy water. In a flash, it came to the inner circle and gathered back to its original form. It started spinning nearby. As soon as it arrived, Zhang Yan suddenly felt his mana and qi being depleted by an external force. With a flick of his finger, dozens of sword gleams slashed at the thunder pearl. But it was of no use. All the sword gleams passed through it and disappeared after a short distance. The spiritual vigor was completely depleted. His gaze froze. In an instant he determined that this item was a threat to him. If he did not deal with it soon, it might become a big problem. With a thought, a ray of water light appeared in the void and rushed towards him. But before the light could reach him, the thunder pearl flashed and moved like a bolt of lightning. In an instant, it dodged to the other side. Before Kong Ing completely defeated the dragon god, he had fought with him a few times. Every time, the magic treasures that targeted the physical body did not have much effect. After that, he took another path and refined the Tai Thunder Pearl to deplete the spiritual vigor and qi. After all, regardless of whether it was a demon or a human cultivator, spiritual vigor and qi were the foundation. This treasure could not directly kill the opponent, but it could greatly weaken the opponent. One of the key points was that he would attack from the side so that the opponent would not have time to deal with the treasure. In the end, the opponent could only be defeated by him. He formed a seal with his fingers and activated his mana. A ray of spiritual light flew out from between his brows. In an instant, qi filled the void and surrounded him. At the same time, the two magic treasures that were wandering outside also attacked him at the same time. Faced with this round of attack, Zhang Yan did not dare to be careless. He spread out his spirit and stood in the unknown void. He quickly thought of a countermeasure. After some thought, he believed that Kong Ing dared to summon this thunder pearl in front of him. He was afraid that he would not be able to break it in a hurry. He might even have the intention of luring him to attack. Since this item was only circling around him, it was very likely that it would lose its effect when he was further away. These 2 points were just conjectures. He would need to test them out later. But what was certain was that this item was not a magic treasure. It was just an instrument. It had no consciousness, no spirit, and no one to control it. In other words, as long as he found a way to attack Kong Ing and make him unable to control it, or find a way to cut off the connection between Kong Ing and the instrument, he would be able to get rid of this item. On the surface, it seemed that dealing with this item was easier than dealing with Kong Ing. But in reality, that was not the case. Not long after, he would be able to calculate the location of Kong Ying's root fruit for the 3rd time. That would be his chance. Having made up his mind, he withdrew his spirit from the void. He raised his hand and the spiritual essence on his body blocked the spiritual light. He then retreated and stepped into the small world. The Tai Thunder Pearl followed him like a shadow and chased after him across the small world. However, the moment before it reached him, he did not feel his spiritual essence being taken away. He could not help but squint his eyes. This was enough to prove that once he was a certain distance away from the pearl, it would lose its effect. He stretched out his hand and held the dragon's essence in his palm. In a flash, he drew out the deep abyss heavy water from the small world and turned it into a water screen that surrounded his body. At this moment, the rainbow spiritual lights fell on him but were all blocked by the heavy water. He took advantage of this opportunity to extract a strand of purple spiritual vigor and absorbed it into his body. This was done intentionally for Kong Ing to see, so that his opponent would think that he was running out of energy. Under normal circumstances, he should be at the end of his rope. Chapter 14:16. Zhang Yan did not know that Kong Ing could use the divine karma imprint to see what happened in the past, but he knew that Kong Ing could not have missed what he had done. He could not hide it even if he wanted to. What he was doing now was a tactical deception. However, it had to be reasonable or else Kong Ing would not fall for it. Kong Ying's gaze was unable to see through the profound heavy water, but the moment the clear spiritual vigor appeared, he sensed a slight change in the qi activity. With his experience and knowledge, it was not difficult for him to deduce the reason. Zhang Yan had just come out from his divine ability and had not given up on deducing the root fruit. It was obvious that his divine will was insufficient, so it was not unexpected for him to replenish the clear spiritual vigor at this time. At this moment, he felt that something was not right, because this seemed to be a little too natural. This thought was instantly suppressed by him. With his cultivation base, as long as he followed the prescribed order and used his advantage to suppress his opponent, he would definitely be able to defeat his opponent. If he still needed to doubt this, then he would be denying himself from the very beginning. It was just that he couldn't think of a way to deal with the abyssal heavy water at the moment. One must know that this item was used to suppress the sky demon, the sun-swallowing green locust. It itself was a treasure of the heavens and earth. Just one drop of it could be used as a talisman. Now that so much of it was gathered together, no matter how profound his cultivation was, he could not do anything to it. Fortunately, the water could not block the thunder pearl of Tai. As long as the pearl was still present, he still had the upper hand. Anyone who faced a talisman that could continuously weaken one's qi and spiritual vigor would not be able to remain unmoved. Zhang Yan looked coldly at the thunder pearl that was not far away. The time was not right. If he attacked now, it would only be a waste of his mana. It would be better to wait until he calculated Kong Ying's root fruit, then he could finish him off. Because they could not defeat their opponent, they stopped at the same time. After a stalemate of 100 breaths, Zhang Yan finally calculated his opponent's root fruit. However, just as he was about to attack again, he suddenly stopped. Kong Ying had actually switched the root fruit switch a step ahead. Previously, Kong Ying did not turn the root fruit because he wanted to waste more of Zhang Yan's divine will. However, it was different this time. With the Tai Thunder Bead, it was more important for him to prevent Zhang Yan from finding his flaws. Moreover, how could he allow his opponent to grasp his movements so easily? Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. If it was anyone else, they would likely suspect that Kong Ying had seen through his intentions. However, Zhang Yan was not worried about this. After all, there was no need for him to panic even if Kong Ying had seen through him. The more he found Kong Yin's root fruit, the easier it would be for him to find it the next time. If Kong Yin continued like this, he would be able to find the root fruit a few more times. In the end, he would only need to perform a few more calculations to find the root fruit. He swallowed another strand of pure spiritual vigor and continued to hide in the heavy water to continue his divinations. After half a minute, he was about to find where the root fruit would land. Initially, he was prepared for his opponent to avoid it again. However, he soon realized that Kong Yin did not do so this time. He was not going to be courteous to his opponent. Through the abyssal heavy water, he flicked his sleeves and immediately released a Tai Xian Qin Yuanhan True Gang. At the same time, he raised his other hand to form a spell and performed a 5 elements escape technique. The Yuanhan True Dipper was originally derived from the Great Profound Sky Invisible True Dipper. Not only was it soundless when it was shot out, it was also shot through the profound heavy water. By the time Kong Ing realized it, it was already a step too late. However, to a mortal metamorphosis cultivator, there was no such thing as a sneak attack. In the blink of an eye, thousands of thoughts went through his mind and he chose the most reliable escape technique. At this moment, there was a huge spiritual vigor descending from his body, as if it was trying to bind his body. He had already anticipated this and dodged it in a flash. Zhang Yan was waiting for this moment. Divine light flashed in his eyes and he used the Eye of the Sun and Moon technique. Kong Yin's Dharmakaya body could not help but pause. Although he managed to break free in the next moment, he had already lost the opportunity to escape. He was hit by the True Gang and his Dharmakaya body was instantly torn into pieces. The scattered spiritual light filled the sky and it did not recover for a long time. Zhang Yan could not help but be surprised. He had prepared a few supernatural powers and was ready to attack. He did not expect that a single True Gang would be enough to destroy his opponent. Looking at it this way, it seemed that other than the true light of 5 elements, the power of this supernatural power was much greater than most of the supernatural powers and Dao techniques that he had created previously. This was probably because it was derived from his own Tai Xian True technique. The two were incomparably compatible, which was why it was able to explode with such power. He did not forget that the main purpose of this trip was to get rid of the threat of the Thunder Pearl. Now that the treasure was not directly controlled by Kong Yin, it had become a lot more sluggish. This was the best time to strike. Thus, he called out in his mind and first attracted the heaven and earth leaf over. A golden light fell down and covered the treasure, drawing in the spiritual vigor for a moment. Then, he shook his sleeve and a ray of water appeared. With a wave, it was sucked into the heaven and earth leaf. Kong In quickly changed the location of his root fruit and quickly gathered his Dharmakaya body. At this moment, he realized that the Thunder Pearl had become extremely weak. He knew that his opponent had already taken it. However, just now, even if he knew what Zhang Yan was going to do, the possibility of him avoiding it was not high. This battle was not only a contest of the divine abilities and Taoist techniques possessed by both sides, but it was also a contest of the external medicines and magical treasures each side possessed. These two aspects had a great impact on a cultivator's combat ability. The cultivators of the 9 continents had broken through their realms to attack, and he had been forced to fight. He was not fully prepared. If he had a defensive treasure with him just now, the result would have been very different. But the truth was that he was just a little bit off. If the Great Dust Realm had taken the initiative to attack the Mountain and Sea Realm, such a mistake would not have occurred. After Zhang Yan removed the threat of the Thunder Pearl, he still maintained his defensive position. In his mind, he continued to calculate his opponent's root fruit and waited for the next opportunity to strike. And with the protection of the heavy abyssal water, before Kong In could break through this layer of defense, he would not be able to hurt him. Kong In looked over. He also knew that if he did not remove this layer of heavy water, he would not be able to pose a real threat to Zhang Yan. However, all things in the world had their strengths and weaknesses. There was no such thing as a perfect and flawless thing. There was no heavy abyssal water in the Great Dust Realm, but he could see that this water was incredibly heavy. If he used pure magic power to control it, the consumption would be unimaginable. Because he was using some external object to control it, and it was not a magical treasure, he would be able to control it easily, and it would not be as difficult as it was now. Just now, he had already thought about it. In a situation where he could not attack Zhang Yan, he could not do anything to this thing, but he could disrupt the connection between them. He made a grabbing motion in the air, and in an instant, the 4 poles appeared. The clouds above churned, and a continent stretched out from below. In an instant, it passed over Zhang Yan and extended into the depths of the void. Zhang Yanchao looked around. It was not difficult to tell that Kong In had forcefully sucked him into his own little world with unimaginable force. Just as he was guessing Kong Yin's intentions, he realized that the surrounding heavy abyssal water had become much heavier, as though it was not listening to his commands. He instantly understood. In this world, the rise and fall of yin and yang, the ebb and flow of spiritual vigor were all controlled by Kong In. It was slightly different from the real world, but it did not affect him much. However, using the dragon soul essence to guide the heavy abyssal water had become difficult. He tried to move his body, and with a rumble, the boundary around him seemed to have been smashed. The boundary gate appeared and disappeared, but he was not able to leave. He was blocked by a heavy force, and he knew that it was Kong Yin's magic power that was blocking him. He felt that the dragon soul essence was becoming more and more powerless to control it. Perhaps it would not break free from his control, but it would not be able to be used to defend it. Hence, he decided to guide it and kept all the heavy water. Seeing that he had achieved his goal, Kong In was about to take advantage of the situation to launch an attack, but he frowned. At this time, other than Zhang Yan, he was still fighting with sect leader Qin and the other 9 continent deities. However, he had been avoiding them, wanting to focus on dealing with Zhang Yan first, and then return to deal with them. Just now, however, he realized that the 9 continent deities were gradually getting closer to where his root fruit was. If they succeeded, then both sides would face a certain threat. He did not neglect it, and set up his divine will to think of a countermeasure. After some consideration, he felt that if he wanted to turn the situation around, he had to deal with one side first. He stared at Zhang Yan. After the previous battle, he already understood how troublesome this opponent was, and he was afraid that he would not be able to deal with him in a short period of time. Since he could not defeat him, he could only think of a way to send him away. His expression became solemn, and he raised his fingers to form a seal. Spiritual light floated above his head like smoke, and a golden bell floated in the middle. After it appeared, it turned into a phantom that kept expanding, and in the blink of an eye, it enveloped the entire Jade Beam heavenly domain. This treasure was called the Jade Law Golden Bell, and it had the same effect as the pure Jade Sun Imperial Talisman. It had no killing power, but it could be used to repel enemies. The latter was used to deal with demons, while the former was used to deal with human cultivators. Initially, he set up these two measures to guard against great enemies like Dragon Sovereign and Yang Chuan. If these people were to invade Cult Master Yu Liang's realm, the battle would definitely turn the heavens and earth upside down, and the entire realm might be destroyed. Thus, not only would expelling them avoid unnecessary losses, it would also give him more time to prepare. Once a mortal cultivator reached the outer realm, it would take a few years before they could enter the heaven and earth gate again. Even without magic treasures like the sky-piercing Gui, they might not be able to return to their original location. It was just that Zhang Yan's Qi Dao cultivation wasn't as strong as his, but his strength body was similar to his. Expelling such a person would be quite a burden for him, and the price he would have to pay would not be small. He might even suffer a great loss of vitality. If it wasn't for the fact that the current situation was very disadvantageous to him, he would not have made this choice. As he circulated his magic power, the rich emotions in Kong Ying's eyes, which had been constantly overflowing with emotions, were reduced to the minimum. Then he clasped his hands together and bowed towards the sky. The Jade Law Golden Bell vibrated and the entire heavenly region was enveloped in a white light. Chapter 14:17. As the bright light that illuminated the entire sky descended, Zhang Yan suddenly felt an omnipresent power surging up his body. Then he felt his body becoming heavier and heavier, heavier and heavier. This power continued to grow, as if there was no end to it. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before he would be pushed out of this world. 8888 Read Book. 2-3 With his current cultivation and knowledge, it was not difficult for him to determine that this mystique Dao technique was not meant to injure, but to expel him out of the Junqian world. In a battle of life and death, there was no limit to what could be done. However, he did not understand. Kong Ying was clearly full of vitality and did not show any signs of weakening. Even if he suffered a small setback, it would not affect the overall situation. Yet, at this time, he suddenly did something like this. Something must have happened. Perhaps he had encountered some big trouble that forced him to do this. Zhang Yan was experienced in battle. With a thought, he more or less deduced the reason. This must be because sect leader Qin had already exerted his strength, causing Kong Ying to feel threatened. Because he was unwilling to face two enemies who could threaten him at the same time, and because he could not deal with either side in a short period of time, he wanted to find a way to send him away. Since that was the case, he could not let this person do as he wished. He channeled his mana and tried to resist the pressure, only to find that the more he resisted, the heavier the pressure became. This was not surprising. With the support of Kong Ying's mana, the technique would definitely be able to suppress him. He made another hand seal and activated the 5 elements escape technique to see if he could escape. However, although he could still move and break out of Kong Ying's small world, he seemed to be bound by some invisible force and could only hover in the vicinity. If he used the strength path to escape, he would need to expend a large amount of vitality, so he could not go far. As such, it was impossible for him to escape before the power of this technique reached its peak. As for using the root fruit to avoid the technique, although it could be dodged for a while, the golden bell had almost enveloped the entire heavenly region. If he wanted to escape, it would take years, and he might not be able to escape even if he used up all his divine will. Moreover, the root fruit could only hide the Chi Path Dharma body, but it could not protect the strength path Dharma body. Therefore, this technique was useless. He pondered for a moment. Since none of the other methods worked, he could only resort to his last resort. With a single thought, lightning flashed all over his body, and he instantly entered the small world. Even after arriving here, that power didn't seem to be affected in the slightest. It followed him like a shadow, and even the small world had to endure this heavy pressure. However, he didn't enter the small world to hide, but to conveniently do one thing. He waved his sleeves and released all the true treasures and magic artifacts he had brought this time. Rays of spiritual light floated and floated outside. His gaze turned and landed on the 9-demon vanquishing scroll. It let out a happy cry and quickly flew in front of him. He stretched out a finger and circulated his magic energy, causing a round and translucent drop of blood essence that was like a crystalline jade bead to drip down and fuse into the devil's slip. After finishing this, he didn't stay here any longer. He stepped out of the small world and continued to resist the heavy pressure. Of course, doing so required a considerable amount of magic power. But it was the same for him and Kong Ying. Especially when it came to maintaining such a tyrannical divine art, every breath was a huge burden. Every moment that they could delay the battle would mean that they would be able to exhaust a portion of their opponent's strength. After half an hour, Zhang Yan felt that he could no longer suppress the pressure. This wasn't because he couldn't bear it anymore, but at this point, he only needed to use a little more of his own strength. Even without Kong Ying's expulsion, he would be able to escape from this world. At this point, there was no point in continuing to resist, so he didn't persist. With a thought, he retracted his Fa Li. At this moment, the light in the sky converged and turned into a jade bell that firmly trapped him. Kong Ying pointed his index and middle fingers at him. The void shook as if a star had shattered. A bright light flashed and disappeared. When he looked again, there was nothing in front of him. He shifted his gaze to the black tortoise. He guessed that there was some mysterious connection between Zhang Yan and this mythological beast. Just now, this was the reason why he couldn't expel it. To prevent Zhang Yan from using the same method to escape, he had to deal with it as well. So, he summoned a technique and attacked. However, the black tortoise's body was strong and sturdy. At this moment, it only closed its eyes and didn't move. No matter how many techniques bombarded it, it was completely unharmed. Even when the Dharma treasures came, they only trembled slightly and didn't seem to cause much damage. After seeing this, Kong Ying's eyes flickered. He knew that ordinary methods wouldn't be able to do anything to this mythological beast. Even if he could destroy its body, as long as he couldn't kill it, it would reform in the next moment. He pondered for a moment and waved his sleeve. A magical talisman that was overflowing with light appeared out of thin air and floated down. He did not hesitate to overdraft the surrounding star power and once again activated the upright jade sun imperial talisman. Summoning it twice in a short period of time could cause the main heaven to lose balance of yin and yang, which could lead to the decline of spiritual opportunity. However, he was prepared to leave the realm with the cultivators, so he didn't have to worry about such things. Although the cultivators of the 9 continents didn't have all of the power they had, most of them were present. If he could defeat them all, then he could essentially take over the entire mountain and sea realm. A single heaven couldn't even compare to that, and therefore he knew what to do. The black tortoise was instantly hit by the imperial talisman. It had no way of dealing with it, and was instantly expelled from the great earth realm. Kong Ying looked at the empty void in front of him, but he didn't leave immediately. He could sense that before Zhang Yan was sent away, he had left the lesser world he had created in this world. He must have wanted to use some secret technique to return from beyond the heavens. He was unable to destroy it in a short period of time, so he used several spells to seal it. It would take at least several years for a mortal cultivator to enter the realm. This was enough time for him to defeat and even kill the remaining cultivators of the 9 continents. In the instant that Zhang Yan was sent to beyond the heavens, sect leader Qin and the others sensed that his aura had disappeared. It wasn't easy to kill a mortal cultivator. With Zhang Yan's strength, it was impossible for him to be killed in an instant. Such a change meant that he was either sealed, or he was no longer in this world. Just now, the heaven and earth gate had been opened for a moment, so the latter was most likely to have been sent out by some kind of magical power. Sect leader Qin knew that this was an important matter. With a thought, he gathered all the true divine wills in that mysterious void. At this moment, everyone's expressions were solemn. In this battle, Zhang Yan was an extremely important part of it. In fact, all the strategies they were using now revolved around him. If he wasn't here, the cultivators of the 9 continents would lose their most important bargaining chip. Ing Chuanxiu said, "Without Reverend Zhang, Kong Ying will definitely go all out to kill me. What should I choose? Yu Xianxiao said coldly, there is no retreat in this battle. Either the enemy dies or we die. As long as we can get rid of Kong Ying, even if we all die here, it's worth it. Now that the battle had come to this point, they had to carry on no matter what. Even if they retreated now, they wouldn't be able to achieve the same result the next time. They could only fight to the death. Xue Dingyuan said, Kong Ying's aura is much weaker than it was just now. It seems that sending Reverend Zhang away was a great loss. Sect leader Qin said calmly, both Hall leader Du Zhen and I have the heaven-reaching Gui in our hands. If Hall leader Du Zhen can't come back, or if he has to stay in the heavens for a long time, he will definitely try to send a message. However, there is no movement from him now. Obviously, he thinks that he can deal with it. We can just do what we did before. As they spoke, everyone felt their surroundings tremble. The figures around them also seemed to be swaying. They knew that Kong Ying was no longer restrained by the other side, so his divine will was able to suppress them with full force. Sect leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and guided the great Kuan divine will to resist. Only then did he manage to stabilize himself. He said slowly, everyone, do your best to deal with him. Remember, don't take the route. Inside the small Shenyuan world, the 9 intimidation demon vanquishing bamboo was originally floating quietly. After a long time, a drop of essence blood appeared on it. Then, a ray of mysterious light rose from it, causing an unknown object to cross the space and come over. After a few breaths, Zhang Yan's body condensed again. If someone was in the primordial void sea at this moment, they would be able to see that the strength path Dharma body outside the heavens and earth gate was disintegrating layer by layer. It seemed that everything had been transferred into this physical body. Although the banishing technique could send him away, it only targeted his chi. If he was an ordinary strength path Dharma body, perhaps Kong Ying would have succeeded. However, he cultivated an ancient demonic cultivation method. As long as there was a drop of essence blood in the small Shenyuan world, he could recover his entire body. Greater than over equal to greater than over equal, although this kind of cultivation method was mysterious, it was inevitable that it would be damaged. After a brief examination, he found that his Yuan Qi had been greatly damaged. Fortunately, he had already predicted this situation. After a brief communication with the 9 intimidation demon vanquishing bamboo, the devil slip shook. Using the heavenly demon essence as bait, it instantly communicated with more unknown objects to come over and continuously replenish the deficit. He could not help but sigh in his heart. If he could find the strength path root fruit, he would not have to go through so much trouble. He could faintly feel that it was somewhere, but with his current strength, it seemed that he could not reach that place. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely find a way to find it. After a while, his strength had completely recovered. The only pity was that Kong Ying had expelled his entire body. At this moment, his Chi Path Dharma body was still in the primordial void sea. It would take at least a few years before it could re-enter the small Shenyuan world. This meant that even if he could use magic treasures, he could only rely on his true spirit and could not unleash its full power. Fortunately, just the strength path Dharma body was enough for the time being. This did not hinder him from deducing the location of the opponent's root fruit. As long as he could do this, he still had a chance in this battle. After a few years, his chi and strength body could once again merge as one. He reached out and grabbed, sucking in a stream of water vapor. Using the chi to condense into a shape, the black tortoise was summoned again. With a shake of its body, in the midst of a loud bang, the small world seal was smashed. Then, he took a step forward and returned to the real world. Chapter 14:18. A Genius in a Second. Remember Love Go? Speaking of the net, providing you with exciting novels to read. The moment Zhang Yan exited the small world, he sensed that Kong Ying's divine will hadn't reached him yet. He knew that this opportunity was fleeting, so he immediately used his divine will to connect with Sect Master Qin and the others. After discussing for a while, he retreated and rode the black tortoise to where the true ones were. Based on the current situation, if the two sides could gather and fight, there was a high chance that they could defeat Kong Ying head-on. However, he guessed that the other side wouldn't let him do that and would try to stop him. As expected, he didn't go far before he saw the stars around him dim and become unsteady. At the same time, the divine wills that were connected to the other true ones were also cut off. He looked over and saw Kong Ying's white robe fluttering. He was already standing in front of him. Kong Ying's tricks had been countered by Zhang Yan several times, but his expression was still as cold as ever. There was no sign of frustration on his face, as if his emotions as a living being had been erased from his body. Zhang Yan didn't attack immediately. He hadn't figured out Kong Ying's background yet, so no matter how he attacked, it would be useless. He stood in the void and sent a mental message. Sect Master Kong, neither of us can avoid this battle. We can only stop after we've determined the outcome. Kong Ying looked at him and replied slowly, the battle between the two worlds started earlier than I expected. Zhang Yan's heart fluttered. From Kong Ying's words, it seemed that he was going to summon the other sovereign emperors to help. However, as the one who initiated the attack, the cultivators of the 9 continents had already considered this situation. They had already destroyed 6 of the formations, and the monarchs of the Junqian realm were scattered all over the heavenly regions. Even if they arrived quickly, it would still take about 10 years, or even longer. As long as they could defeat them before then, they would be able to win. If the 9 continents couldn't subdue their opponent in such a long time, there was no point in continuing the battle. In the depths of space, Gong Chang supported his chin with one hand as he sat on a large platform, while his other hand was playing with the jade pot. He had already found a clue, and he would be able to find the entrance if he was given some time. Just as he was pondering, he felt a surge of God's will descend upon him. His body shook and he revealed a look of awe. Supreme Headmaster? Not daring to be negligent, he immediately used his divine will to meet the attack. After a while, he retreated. However, he sat there without moving, as if he was deep in thought. Kong Ying ordered him to immediately go to the main heaven to fight against the cultivators of the 9 continents. He secretly guessed that this was most likely because the sect master could no longer control the situation. He was fully aware of the capabilities of this headmaster. If even a 3rd-stage mortal metamorphosis realm cultivator was unable to subdue the enemy, then it meant that the enemy's capabilities were beyond his expectations. Even if he went, he might not be able to get anything out of it. He might even lose his life. However, if he did not go and Kong Ying won, he would not be able to live either. At this moment, a disciple saw that he had not spoken for a long time and asked cautiously, "Lord?" Gong Chang raised his head, a trace of viciousness appeared on his face. "Go and pass down the order, head to the main heaven at full speed." No matter what, he had to make a choice now. Instead of choosing the cultivators of the 9 continents whose attitude was unclear, he might as well continue to support Kong Ying, whom he was already familiar with. He was not the only one. At this moment, the other sovereign of the Yuliang cult, Bei Xiangdong, had also received the divine will transmission. After careful consideration, he sighed and decided to meet up with Kong Ying. On the other side, a huge palace was moving towards the main heaven of Yuliangism. Yang Chuan was originally meditating when he suddenly sensed something and opened his eyes. Jiang Kan and Shang Zhou also noticed something was wrong and came out of their meditations at the same time. Shang Zhou said, "Palace Lord, just now, that divine will, is it Sect Master Kong?" Yang Chuan pondered for a while and said, "It is indeed Kong Ying, he seems to want to speak to me." Shang Zhou thought for a while and said, "At this time, is he going to ask for help from us?" Yang Chuan said calmly, "Perhaps." Jiang Kan said coldly, "Palace Lord does not want to speak to Kong Ying, is there a reason?" Yang Chuan snorted and said, "Reason? I have no misgivings," he rapped on the table. "I was just thinking about what conditions I should put forward later. He came to me, obviously in a disadvantageous situation. How could it be so easy to get him to help at this time?" Jiang Kan nodded and said, "Palace Lord is right, this is an opportunity to weaken Yuliangism." Shang Zhou said, "Palace Lord, in front of a great enemy, is this?" Jiang Kan said coldly, "Supervisor, you don't have to worry about this. If the enemy is powerful, then we can forget about this. However, if we can defeat the enemy, then everything that we have discussed now can be counted in the future. Therefore, no matter what the outcome is, for the sake of the Qi accumulation palace, we must raise the conditions. Yang Chuan said at this moment, "We will discuss everything after I have spoken to Kong Yin." He raised his spirit to greet him, but after a while, it retreated. He did not mention what they had discussed just now, but only said, "Pass down my order. Do not worry about mana and spiritual vigor. Move forward as fast as you can." In the main heaven of Yuliangism, 300 days had passed in a flash. Almost a year had passed, but the battle between the two sides was still ongoing. Zhang Yan pressed down with his palm, and the void in front of him collapsed. All the spiritual rainbows and white rays that were bombarding him were shattered, and even the magic treasures that were about to hit him were shaken away. Then, with a sway of his body, he instantly broke through the void and came close to Kong Yin. He punched and blew away half of the latter's Dharma body. After that, he continued to attack until Kong Yin changed his root fruit and returned to his original appearance. Only then did he stop. As he calculated the location of Kong Yin's root fruit again and again, the next time he found it, the speed at which he found it became faster and faster. At this moment, he only needed 10 breaths of time to launch an attack on Kong Yin. There were some ripples in Kong Yin's eyes. Originally, he thought that since Zhang Yan's spirit was limited with his spiritual qi origin that was far superior to his opponent's, in addition to the portion of purple clear spiritual vigor that he obtained from Fan and Dong, it would not be difficult for him to defeat his opponent. By then, when the other monarchs of Junqian realm arrived, it would not be difficult for him to counterattack. But now, he no longer had such thoughts. His opponent was recklessly deducing the location of his reincarnation fruit without any hesitation. His divine will seemed to be boundless, and in order to prevent further damage to his origin energy, he had no choice but to follow suit. As a result, his divine will and origin energy were being rapidly depleted. What was more disadvantageous was that he had to maintain the changes of the past and the future, and suppress the communication between the two sides. Otherwise, once Zhang Yan and sect leader Qin's group were together, the situation would become even worse. Adding all these factors together, the consumption was so great that it was unimaginable for ordinary cultivators. Boom! In his eyes, a huge hand came slapping towards him, and instantly, his whole body was scattered again. After a breath, his root fruit changed again, but with the endless replenishment of his origin qi, his doppelganger was able to recover quickly. But after forming his doppelganger this time, the last bit of purple clear spiritual vigor was used up. Because he could not see where his opponent's bottom line was, if he continued to fight like this, it was very likely that he would lose. At this moment, if he wanted to turn the situation around, he needed to remove the changes of the past and the future, and stop suppressing his opponent's spirit. Although he could not defeat his opponent head-on, it could greatly reduce the consumption of his origin qi, and thus allow him to last longer. After he made up his mind, he did not hesitate and immediately stopped all the changes of the divine art. With a flick of his sleeve, he turned and left. With just one step, he went far into the sky, and with another step, he disappeared in front of everyone. The other monarchs of Junqian realm could not rush over quickly, but this did not mean that he could not retreat and meet up with them. Originally, it would take more than 10 years for the two sides to meet up, but now it only took 4 to 5 years. At the very beginning, he did not call for help because he thought that he had a higher chance of winning. Moreover, Yuliangism had always been supported by him alone. If he gave such an order, it would undoubtedly damage his dignity, and it would not be beneficial for him to command his subordinates in the future. However, his heart was abnormally cold, and he only cared about the real result. He never cared about things like face, and everything he did was based on benefits. Now that he saw that the 9 continents had the possibility of defeating him, the title of sect leader was no longer worth protecting, so he immediately threw it aside. Moreover, as long as he still had his strength, it would not be difficult to suppress those who were not inferior to him in a few days. As for the followers in the main heaven, he had the advantage earlier, so naturally he had the right to protect them. Now that he could not defeat the enemy, and he might not be able to protect himself. Of course, he abandoned them without hesitation. Zhang Yan suddenly felt his vision blur, and then he sensed that Kong Ying's aura had weakened. When he sensed it again, he was already very far away. At the same time, there was no longer any obstruction in his divine will, so how could he not know that Kong Ying had already escaped? He turned his gaze and saw the figure of the big Kuan, and sect leader Qin and the others were standing on its back. His body swayed and he came close and he bowed, saying, "Sect leader, Kong Ying has retreated, and we need to borrow Ngui's strength to chase after him." Sect leader Qin said calmly, "He can't escape." Xue Dingyuan said, "This person is already at his wit's end, but his vitality is still very thick, and it is not something that can be worn away in a short period of time." Yu Xianxiao said, "No matter how much vitality this person has, there will be a day when we kill him." Sect leader Qin raised his horsetail whisk, and the big Kuan, Nge, was ordered to rush forward. At this moment, it seemed as if it had passed through layers of barriers, and countless stars flew around it. When it stopped, a ray of light could be seen moving swiftly in front of it. Zhang Yan looked ahead, and he thought for a while, and said, "Just now, from Kong Ying's words, it seems like he wants to summon the other monarchs to help him in the battle. At this moment he probably wants to meet up with the other monarchs so that he can fight with me again." Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "This is within my expectations." Yu Xuanxiao's eyes were cold and he said, "We must not allow him to do this. We must kill this person before that happens." Everyone nodded solemnly. They all understood that in this battle just now, Kong Ying had suffered great losses, and they had also expended a lot of energy. If they allowed this person to meet up with the other monarchs of the Junshan realm, then it was very likely that they would have to give up the fruit of victory that they were so close to. However, at this stage, any kind of strange and wonderful plan was useless. What was going to happen next was the most boring and cruel battle of attrition. Between the two sides, only when one side completely fell would this battle truly end. Chapter 1419. The Earth Star was located at the outermost part of the right arm of the Yuliang heaven. After receiving the news that Yuliangism was being invaded by foreign enemies, the true monarch who was in charge of this place had already retreated with his trusted subordinates, leaving only a few low-level cultivators to guard this place. On this day, a cultivator who was sitting on the observatory suddenly felt that something was wrong. He looked up into the sky and exclaimed, "What is that?" In the sky, there were two huge streams of light passing by one after another. Suddenly, the sky darkened, and the surrounding stars were extinguished like candles. For a moment, it was as if the world had fallen into eternal darkness. At the same time, all the cultivators who saw this scene felt that their bodies could not move. Those who were originally floating in the sky fell from the sky one by one. One of the imperial censors barely managed to transmit his voice, "Everyone, don't look anymore." At the same time, the entire Earth star seemed to be stirred up by an invisible force. Vast oceans rolled across the land, and underground fire erupted. Fortunately, there was a star-ring jade wall outside, suppressing all of this. However, the Earth star that did not have any defensive formations was not so lucky. After the two streams of light passed by, it was as if they were pulled by a great force. They either collapsed or inexplicably shifted. Zhang Yan stood on the back of the giant Kuan and watched as the stream of light in front of him moved left and right under Ying Chuanxiu's sword ray. From time to time, a stream of light would be cut off. However, the stream of light did not seem to care. Every time it was damaged, it would immediately return to its original state. It had been 2 years since the beginning of the pursuit of Kong Yin. At this point, he could already predict Kong Yin's movements. No matter what he did, it would be useless. After Kong Ying understood this point, he gave up on this action and only focused on escaping. Moreover, he did not even use any divine abilities or Dao techniques. However, in this way, the cultivators of the 9 continents needed to get close to him before they could harm him. Thus, the loss of their vitality was not as great as before. After a long time, the sword ray in the sky disappeared. Ying Chuanxiu withdrew his sword and retreated. At this time, Mengjida stood up from the back of the giant Kuan. He bowed and went forward to replace Ing Chuanqiu. In these 2 years of pursuit, the cultivators of the 9 continents, in order to guard against Kong Yin's counterattack and at the same time, to prevent everyone's magical power from being exhausted in one go, had taken turns to attack in order to maintain a continuous offensive. However, Zi Qing's spiritual opportunity had been consumed a lot because of this. Now, there was not much left. If this continued, it would be used up in a month at most. At this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly felt a surge of spiritual vigor in his sleeve. He examined it and realized that it was from the dual realm dial. With a flick of his sleeve, he placed it outside. There was a flash of light on the dial and an unfamiliar Taoist appeared. The Taoist bowed to him and said, "Taoist Zhang, Sima has something to report. Is it convenient for Taoist to speak?" Zhang Yan nodded. "Don't worry. Kong Yin is currently on the run. The enlightened masters are all here. You can speak without worry." When Sima Quan heard this, he immediately understood that the 9 continents had the upper hand. His spirit was instantly lifted. He said, "Just now, I received a message from a clone. It said that a powerful person passed by the nearby heavens. Looking at the direction he is heading, it should be the main heavens of Yuliangism." Zhang Yan asked, "Can Taoist Sima recognize the identity of the person?" Sima Quan said, "It should be from the Qi accumulation palace. Moreover, it's very likely that it's the palace master Yang Chuan and the other 2 emperors in the palace. He had planted many spies in the Qi accumulation palace. In addition to what he had learned from Sanren Rao, he was very clear about the details of the palace. Therefore, with one look, he could roughly guess the situation." Sect leader Qin asked, "Taoist Sima, where did you see the vehicle?" Sima Quan bowed and replied, "It was in the Shaoyang heavenly region." The enlightened masters had already memorized the heavenly star map. After thinking for a while, they knew the distance between the 2 sides. Ing Chuanqiu said in a deep voice, "Based on Kong Ying's current speed, the 2 sides will meet in at most a year's time." Xue Dingyuan sighed and said, "Looks like Taoist Zhang's prediction is correct. If the emperors of the Qi accumulation palace can come over, I'm sure the other emperors can also come. We must try our best to deal with this person within 2 years. Otherwise, it's very likely that something unexpected will happen." Zhang Yan said to Sima Quan, "Taoist Sima, your message was very timely. If there's anything strange, you can report to me again." Sima Quan cupped his hands in greeting and left. Xue Dingyuan thought for a while and reminded everyone, Kong Ing is the leader of Yuliangism. It's impossible that he doesn't have a vehicle when he travels to the emptiness sky. Perhaps he has more than one. It's just that we've been chasing after him for many years, but we still haven't seen him use it. It's likely that he's preparing to leave it for the last moment. We need to be on guard." Sect leader Qin said, "Sect leader Xue is right. This is indeed a precaution." Yu Xianshao sneered and said, "Since he's not willing to use it first, then we'll force him a little. I don't believe that he can withstand it. Don't look at how weak Kong Ying's aura was right now. If he took out the vehicle, he could meditate and recover some of his magic power. However, this was only a small matter. In another 1 or 2 years, he would be getting closer to the other emperors of the Junqian realm. Think about it. If this person suddenly took out such a flying magical artifact during the last part of the journey, it would be very fatal. Sect leader Qin pondered for a while and said, "Under my continuous attacks, Kong Ying's aura has weakened a lot. He can only hold on for a few more days. After that, we can attack him with all our strength. There's no need to hold back anymore." Everyone replied in agreement. If they wanted to kill Kong Ying, they also needed to pay attention to strategy. According to the plan of the cultivators of the 9 continents, they would first use the method of taking turns to continuously wear down Kong Ying's vitality. At the same time, they would maintain their own combat power. When Kong Ying's aura was at its weakest, they would suddenly attack and kill him in an extremely short period of time. However, now that they heard that there were 2 reasons, they had to bring forward the time to attack. Sect leader Qin took out his horsetail whisk and pointed at the big Kuan under him. He said, "Ingue, Do you really know how to use that method? Ingwe shook his body and snorted in response. He seemed to be unhappy that sect leader Qin didn't believe him. Sect leader Qin smiled and nodded. That's good. The technique he was talking about was the change of the past and the future. As a void variant, the great Kun Ingwe was born with this ability. However, he did not know how to drag people into the change. After witnessing Kong Ying's use of this technique, and under the supervision of sect leader Qin, he finally understood it. With this method, even if they really ran into the other emperors of the Junshin realm in advance, they could still think of a way to delay them for a period of time. After sect leader Qin asked, he already had a plan. He raised his head and said, "Everyone, get ready to attack." The Zhen didn't stand on ceremony. When the big Kun broke through the void and caught up with Kong Ing again, they all took out their magic treasures and attacked this enemy. This time, they attacked with all their strength, which was different from before. Kong Ing was caught off guard, and his doppelganger was instantly destroyed. Countless spiritual lights scattered, and for a moment, it was as if a dazzling silver river had appeared in the void. He instantly felt the pressure on him increase by several times. He knew that the 9 provinces were getting serious. He knew that he couldn't recover his doppelganger under such an attack, so he held the root fruit and dodged it. At the same time, the spiritual lights flashed, and he returned to his original appearance. Zhang Yan was already waiting at the side. After Kong Ing held the root fruit, he calculated in his heart. In just a breath's time, he calculated where Kong Ing would land. He immediately communicated with the Zhen with his divine will. In the next moment, Kong Ying's doppelganger was torn apart by the spiritual lights of the sword that filled the void. However, as long as this person's vitality wasn't exhausted, he wouldn't die immediately. After a few breaths' time, he appeared in front of everyone again. This situation repeated for the next few months. As time passed, Kong Ying's qi became weaker and weaker. The Zhen's eyes never left this enemy. If this person didn't use any methods to save himself, then they were confident that they could kill him within 100 days. However, at this point, the 9 provinces had used up all their strength. Zi Qing's spiritual vigor was almost exhausted, and her vitality was greatly depleted. Her aura was declining, and her attacks weren't as grand as before. However, Kong Ing was in a worse state than them. After a few more rounds of attacks, he felt that he couldn't take it anymore. He shook his sleeve and released an instrument that looked like a ball. The object looked like it was made from countless pieces of jade. At a glance, it had a circumference of more than 100 feet. After he summoned this object, he waited for a moment, and with a flash of his body, he was already inside. This Dharma chariot was called Curved Beard Star Seed. If it wasn't for the fact that he disliked the fact that it was too slow to be used and that he couldn't attack the enemy within it, making it unsuitable for battle, he would have taken it out to protect himself when he was fighting Zhang Yan. Yu Xianshao held the Taizhua sword and slashed at it. He raised his eyebrows and said, "This object is very sturdy. Only the magic treasure of your sect can break it." Sect leader Qin nodded and took out the Void Yuan mysterious cave. He raised his horsetail whisk and sent the black qi bead forward. Just now, Kong Ing was adjusting his breath for a few breaths. Suddenly, he felt a sense of danger. At his level of cultivation, when he encountered a life-threatening danger, he didn't need to take the initiative to look into the future. He knew that he couldn't stay here any longer. Thus, he decisively took out a spell and teleported out of the instrument. The moment he left, the black qi bead that flew to the top of the instrument expanded and shrank, and the curved beard star instantly disappeared. Zhang Yan stared at the escaping light that teleported out. The light in his eyes became sharper. He could see that Kong Ying's vitality was almost exhausted. If he put in a little more effort, he would be able to kill this person. Because he was a body of strength, many magic treasures weren't very powerful. Previously, he had been using his divine abilities to attack the enemy, so he lost a lot more vitality than the others. However, he was well prepared. Even if he didn't have the purple spiritual opportunity, he still had other things to replenish it. He activated the demon-subduing slip in his heart and used the essence of a mysterious heavenly devil as bait, instantly attracting that indescribable thing to traverse through the air and quickly replenish his vitality. Very soon, the aura in his body skyrocketed. When his vitality recovered, he was about to attack. At this moment, he suddenly felt something in his heart. He looked up and saw that the heaven and earth gate was torn open. Then, a clear light shot down from above. He couldn't help but laugh and said, "You came back at the right time." He raised his head and swallowed, allowing the clear light to enter his body. In just a moment, his chi and strength Dharma body merged into one again. His eyes narrowed, and he quickly gathered all the mana in his body to point forward. Tai Xian Qing Yuan Han Jin Gang, blasted out. Chapter 1420. Zhang Yan's divine art landed on Kong Ying's Dharma body in an instant. The Dharma body was unable to block it and was instantly destroyed by an invisible force. Because Kong Ying was already extremely weak, the spiritual aura that spread out in all directions was not as hard to destroy as before. Instead, many of the spiritual aura was instantly destroyed and no longer existed. The remaining spiritual aura was less than a third of its original strength. All the Zhen masters were greatly refreshed. They could all feel that Kong Ying's qi had suddenly weakened. It was obvious that Zhang Yan's attack had severely injured him. This time, Kong Ying did not return to his Dharma body like before. Instead, all the spiritual aura shot out like a meteor and disappeared into the void. His speed was several times faster than just now. Yu Xianshao immediately spoke when he saw this. He's probably utilized all his remaining strength to fight with all his might. If we're able to catch up to him, then we'll be able to annihilate him in one go and end this battle. All the Zhen masters nodded their heads and gathered their qi to prepare for the final attack. Sect leader Qin did not say anything. When Kong Ying left on the spiritual aura, sect leader Qin had already controlled the Kuan to chase after him. At this moment, they could not afford to give Kong Ying any chance to catch his breath. Otherwise, it would be hard to guarantee that Kong Ying would not escape to the outer space. Even if the void primordial sea could not adjust its qi circulation and cultivate, it would not be a threat when it returned. However, if Kong Ying did not die, it would not be the end of the matter, and no one could rest easy. Zhang Yan watched as the spiritual aura body moved faster and faster in front of him. He frowned slightly. He felt that something was wrong. Although Kong Ying was severely injured, he was not at the end of the line. This kind of secret art could be used a few days later. However, Kong Ying's decisiveness in escaping was a little like pushing a boat with the current. Xue Dingyuan noticed his expression and asked, "Sage Zhang, is there something wrong?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "Just as sect leader you said, if I catch up to this man, he will definitely die. Judging from his qi, he will only be able to run for about 20 days at most, and that will be the time of his death. However, this man is a great leader. Will he really put his life on the line in these 10 days? Xue Dingyuan pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, "Unless an unforeseen event occurred during these 20 days, and this unforeseen event might be able to save this person's life." He paused for a moment, and then he looked up. Could it be that the other imperial monarchs of this world are about to arrive? Zhang Yan muttered, "It's not impossible." Based on their initial estimations, the two sides would only meet in about a year or two, and there was still some time before that. However, if the sovereigns who came to help were a little faster, it was possible for them to meet up with Kong Ying before they caught up to him. At this moment, they were no longer at their peak. At most, they only had half of their original strength. If they really met up with Kong Ying, the situation would be a little unpredictable. At this time, sect leader Qin opened his mouth and said, "If the sovereign of Junchen realm comes, Ingui will deal with him. Everyone just needs to get to know Kong Ying as soon as possible." After hearing sect leader Qin's words, everyone knew that they were already prepared, and they immediately felt relieved. Kong Ying's body turned into a stream of light and flew away. After putting some distance between him and the crowd of 9 provinces, he circulated his magical power and took out a handful of tiny purple pills from his small world. This pill was called Spirit Channel Powder, and it was a great medicine refined by Purple Clear's spiritual opportunity. Not only could it improve one's cultivation, it could also replenish the lost vitality. It could be considered as the last thing he could rely on. Just now, he had asked with his spirit, and knew that Gong Chang was the closest to him. Yang Chuan and the others were also close behind, and they would meet in another 10 to 20 days. He was originally prepared to take this medicine before they met, and then unite with the others to attack. That way, if they were caught off guard, there was a high chance that they could turn the situation around. Even if they could not heavily injure the 9 provinces, they could still find a way to force them out of Junqian realm. However, Zhang Yan's unexpected attack had completely destroyed his plan. This was also because he had used too much of his vitality, and the root fruit was almost completely hidden. Otherwise, he would have seen the danger and avoided it. After suffering such a heavy setback, he would definitely not be able to hold on for that long. At this moment, he could only use this item. In reality, this great medicine was not only left to deal with the 9 provinces, but also to guard against the other monarchs. He clearly knew that the Gong brothers were only subdued by him on the surface, and they had other thoughts in their hearts. Yang Chuan, needless to say, had always been hostile towards him. It was only because his cultivation was not strong enough that he reluctantly agreed to cooperate with him. If he saw that he was weak, it was very likely that he would have other thoughts. However, only by getting through this obstacle in front of him could he talk about success or failure in the future. Therefore, he had no other choice. He immediately circulated his magic power, and the purple pills were all dispersed, allowing them to enter his spiritual light. In just a short while, his vitality was rapidly increasing. Although spirit channel powder was a great medicine, compared to his original strong foundation, it was just a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. It was impossible for him to completely recover, and he could only temporarily hold on for a while. After recovering a little, he immediately summoned a grand divine will and communicated with Gong Xiao, Yang Chuan, and the others. He did not say much, only telling them to be fully prepared, and not to underestimate the cultivators of the 9 provinces when the time came. After talking with Kong Ying for a while, Yang Chuan retracted his divine will. His eyes flashed and he said, "Kong Ying's divine will is full. It seems that he has suffered some losses, but it is not serious. I purposely extended the time to test him, and he did not rush me. It seems that he can still hold on to the situation." Jiang Kan thought for a while and said, "No, there is something strange here. Previously, Kong Ying did not ask for my help, which means that he has confidence in subduing the enemy. If he is full of vitality, why would he ask for my help? It is very likely that he is just pretending, afraid that I will turn around and harm him." Yang Chuan snorted and said, "I also suspect that he is bluffing, but if that is the case, it means that he is already at the end of his strength." Shang Zhou asked, "Then should we go or not?" Yang Chuan sneered, "Why not?" Even with Kong Ying's ability, he was still forced to this state. The 9 provinces will not have it easy either. This is our chance. It was not difficult for Jiang Kan and Shang Zhou to understand what he meant. If the situation was as such, then they might be able to capture all the people on both sides at once, eliminating all the enemies inside and outside at the same time. If not, then they could just retreat later. Kong Ying's chi flow increased, and the people of the 9 provinces also noticed it. According to the current situation, this person could at least last for another 100 days, and this added a lot of variables. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "So this person has such a life-saving treasure on him. No wonder." This was Kong Ying's last resort. Previously, the situation was unclear, so he did not act immediately. Now that the other party had revealed his trump card, there was no need to wait any longer. He cupped his hands towards sect leader Qin and said, "Sect leader, disciple will use a supernatural power to capture Kong Ying. If this person wants to escape, he will change his chi flow from time to time. In this way, at most 10 days, we will be able to force him to use up his chi." Sect leader Qin nodded slightly, and with a wave of his horsetail whisk, a wisp of purple gas floated over and said, "I still have a wisp of purple pure spiritual chi here. I was originally prepared to save it for a crisis, but it is especially urgent now. Hall Master Du Zhen, please take it." Zhang Yan understood in his heart that this was the last wisp of sect leader Qin's pure spiritual qi. Once this pure spiritual qi was used up, the 9 continents would no longer have anything else to replenish their primordial qi. However, this was not the time to decline. He immediately took it and concentrated for a moment. With a flash of his eyes, he used the Eye of the Sun and Moon technique on Kong Ying. As expected, after this person was frozen for a moment, he immediately changed his qi flow. Without any hesitation, he calculated where he would land and used another supernatural power. Kong Ying knew that once he was forced to stop, he would not be able to escape anymore. He could not care about the loss of his qi and could only continue to change his qi flow. Unknowingly, 10 days had passed in the blink of an eye. In the past few days, Zhang Yan had been using his divine arts non-stop, and his consumption of energy was even greater than Kong Yin's. Even with his abundant primordial qi, he could feel that the circulation of his mana had become sluggish. However, the results of the battle were not small. Kong Ying's qi flow was greatly reduced, and his speed was reduced by almost half. It was obvious that he could not hold on any longer. Seeing that success was in sight, he took a deep breath, and from the demon's subduing slip, he absorbed another heavenly demon's essence into his body to replenish his qi. However, at this moment, not far in front of him, an extremely unfamiliar and strong qi flow appeared. It was clearly a monarch of Junqian world coming over. At this moment, on the other side, Gong Chang was rushing over on his chariot. He first sensed Kong Ying's extremely weak qi flow, and his heart was filled with shock. Even though he had thought of countless possibilities, when he saw this sect master being forced to such a state, he still found it hard to believe. Before he could think of what to do, he felt that there were 8 grand auras rapidly approaching from behind, and he couldn't help but be shocked. Thousands of thoughts instantly flashed through his mind, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Meet them." It was impossible for him to fight against 8 people of the same generation, but looking at their speed, it was impossible for him to escape, so he might as well take a gamble. He welcomed Kong Ying in, and he still had a lot of purple clearling qi. As long as he helped Kong Ying recover some qi, there was still a chance for him to fight. At this moment, Kong Ying was already at the end of his rope. After noticing Gongchang Palace City, his traveling light suddenly lengthened, and his speed increased again. At this moment, several powerful qi flows appeared behind him. Even though they were still far away and a little blurry, it was obvious that they were closing in very quickly. The expressions of the 9 provinces' sect masters tightened. If Kong Ying was covered, he would be able to recover his qi, or just directly escape, then all the previous efforts of this battle would be in vain. At this moment, Sect Master Qin raised his horsetail whisk and knocked heavily on the back of the big Kuan. The latter's body shone brightly, and the surrounding starlight instantly dimmed. The traveling light that Kong Ying flew towards actually passed through Gongshao Palace City, as if the two of them were not in the same void space. It was the big Kuan Ingui who directly used the change of the past and the future to separate the two of them. As for Kong Ying, in order to avoid the body-fixing divine ability, his root fruit changed from time to time, and he did not use it. But for a moment he was also trapped. Before waiting for him to come out, Yu Xianshao raised his hand, and as the Taizhua sword moved, a clear sword light had already slashed through the air from his body. The divine intent contained in the sword was extremely sharp, and a large part of the Dharmakaya's origin chi was almost slashed away, leaving only scattered spiritual light. Zhang Yan saw it clearly, and his eyes shone brightly. He stretched out his hand, and a large hand made of Xian Qi grew larger and larger in the void space. When it reached the spiritual light, it closed its 5 fingers and squeezed it into its palm. At the same time, whether it was the 9 provinces' sect masters or the monarchs of the Junqian realm who had rushed over, they all heard an earth-shattering boom. Chapter 1421. Within the palace, Yang Chuan and the other 2 couldn't help but be startled by the sound. It wasn't coming from outside, but from the heavens and earth, born from the heart. Anyone whose cultivation had reached their level, no matter where they were, would be able to hear it. Yang Chuan suddenly stood up and looked into the distance. After a long time he said, Kong Ying lost. Jiang Kan and Shang Zhou already knew the answer, but hearing it from his own mouth still shocked them. They couldn't believe it, just like Gong Chang. Ever since Kong Ying reached the third stage, he had been like a dark cloud, pressing down on the cultivators of the Great Dust Realm. For thousands of years, Yuliangism had been conquering everywhere, destroying countless sections. Even the Qi accumulation palace could only rely on one of their sect's treasures to defend themselves, not daring to go out and fight. This time, even if a great enemy came from the outside world, no one really thought that he would lose. But in the end, not only did he lose, he even lost his life. The palace the three of them were in was gradually moving closer to the place where the battle was taking place. Not only could they sense the 8 majestic auras in front of them, but they could also almost see the appearance of the person opposite them. When they saw Inggui's incomparably huge figure, the three of them were on high alert. Each of them had severed their past bodies, so it wasn't difficult for them to sense an aura similar to Kong Ying's from the giant rock. Yang Chuan could also sense that it was this aura outside the mountain and sea realm that had stopped him and Kong Ying from taking the risk. He pondered for a moment. If they had taken the risk that day, would the outcome have been different? He shook his head. Even if Kong Ying was willing, he was unwilling. If the battle went badly, Kong Ying would be able to leave, but it would be hard to say what would happen to him. Shang Zhou said, Palace Master, do you want to accept the battle? Yang Chuan weighed the difference in strength between the two sides, but rejected the idea. He could see that although the other side's aura was weak after a long battle, he hadn't truly lost his ability to fight. Moreover, there was still the giant rock inside, so it would be difficult for them to win. Jiang Kan said coldly, If you don't want to fight, then you need to ask for peace. Yang Chuan thought about it seriously, then nodded. He was the only one who didn't want to fight, but the other side might not think the same. Since even Kong Ying hadn't escaped, it was clear that the other side had some kind of movement technique. If he really chose to fight, they could escape, but they would have to pay a price. He pondered for a moment, then said, Wait for me to go and talk to this person to test him. The two of you wait here, don't act rashly until I return. With Kong Ying's death, whether it was status, or cultivation, he was now the leader. Naturally, he was the only one who could come forward and negotiate with the 9 continents. He rode the cloud raft out of the palace. At this moment, he glanced over and saw Gong Chang standing alone in front of him. He had an idea and transmitted a message using his spirit, Fellow Taoist Gong Chang, since Chief Kong is no longer here, why not come to my Qi accumulation palace? Although Kong Ying was dead, Yuliangism still had a lot of power left. The Gong brothers controlled more than half of the power in the right heaven region. If they could be subdued, it would undoubtedly strengthen the power of the Qi sect. Now was an excellent opportunity. If he didn't agree to the threat from the cultivators of the 9 continents, he would have to think about what would happen to him if he didn't have anyone to protect him. Just now, although Gong Chang was involved in the changes of the past and the future, the giant Kuan didn't have any powerful magical powers. Therefore, he was released after Kong Ying died. But he was alone, so he was extremely wary of the cultivators of the 9 continents. At this moment, he couldn't fight, but he couldn't retreat either. He was in a dilemma. Now that he suddenly heard a message from Yang Chuan, he thought about it and agreed without much hesitation. On the side of the cultivators of the 9 continents, after Zhang Yan killed Kong Ying, he slowly withdrew his magical powers and took back his cosmos sac. Just now, a Xian Kong netherworld hole appeared above the great mystery hand. It sucked in all the scattered star stones, light and dust around it. Everyone watched quietly. With Kong Ying dead, the threat that the Junshan realm posed to the mountain and sea realm was greatly reduced. Whether to advance or retreat was up to them. Mengjida looked at the approaching palace and said to sect leader Qin, Master, do you want to fight with this person? Sect leader Qin said in a low voice, Masters, your vitality has been greatly damaged. It's not convenient for you to continue fighting. Right now, everyone in the Junshan realm was at the 2nd stage, and their vitality was full. Although the giant Kun Ingui was here, they could still fight, but their own losses would be incalculable. In the end, there might not be many who could survive. Therefore, it was best to avoid the battle as much as possible. Ing Chuanqiu said, "Everyone, someone is coming. It's just one person and he seems to want to talk to me." Yang Chuan came over on the raft and stopped. Although he was facing all the cultivators of the 9 continents alone, he wasn't afraid. He had a treasure that could even block Kong Ying's attacks, so he wasn't afraid of being surrounded. He came up and bowed, saying, "Is that fellow cultivator from the 9 continents?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Sect leader, please allow disciple to go and meet him." Among everyone present, he was the one with the most vitality. Now that he had absorbed the last strand of pure purple spiritual qi into his body, he still had about 80% of his original combat power. He was the most suitable person to fight. Sect leader Qi nodded and said, "Hall Master Duzhen, please be careful." Zhang Yan acknowledged and took the initiative to stand out. He returned the greeting and said, "I Zhang Yan, is that Palace Master Yang of the Qi Accumulation Palace?" Yang Chuan knew that this person could destroy the 6 formations, so he obviously had eyes and ears in the Junqian realm. It wasn't strange that he could recognize him. He said, "That's me." Just as he spoke, his appearance suddenly changed. First, he was a young man. After a while, he became an old man. In the next moment, he became a strong man. After cultivators of the Qi path cultivated Dharmakaya, if they didn't travel with their corporeal body, it was easy for them to change their appearance. However, to keep changing like this, it was either because they cultivated some kind of technique or because they had other intentions. Zhang Yan tried to sense it, only to discover that Yang Chuan had already firmly grasped the root fruit. This action wasn't sudden. After all, there was only one person here, and it was understandable for him to do this for safety. But what wasn't simple was that this person was constantly changing. Moreover, when he did this, he still had a composed expression, and his aura didn't weaken at all. Thinking back to the rumor that Yang Chuan was able to fight against Kong Yin with the help of a palace guarding treasure, he couldn't help but think to himself, if this transformation was caused by that treasure, then he really could fight against Kong Yin. Yang Chuan's transformation was purposely shown to the cultivators of the 9 continents. He thought that only by showing enough strength could the other party have some reservations and not dare to act recklessly. He did indeed rely on the treasure to do this. This treasure was held by the previous palace masters of the Qi Accumulation Palace. What was strange was that, as the owner of the treasure, he had never seen what this treasure looked like. He didn't even know where it was. He only knew that it existed and that whoever became the palace master of the Qi Accumulation Palace would naturally be able to use this treasure. With this treasure, he could change his foundation at any time with just a thought. Moreover, it would not consume his own vitality, so even Kong Yin couldn't do anything to him. However, he could feel that by using this treasure, he had to pay a price. It was just that he couldn't put into words what he had lost. Every palace master of the Qi Accumulation Palace had mysteriously disappeared without an exception. He suspected that it was because he had overused this treasure. Therefore, he rarely used it unless it was absolutely necessary. He looked at Zhang Yan and said in a low voice, "Just now, the person who was killed by your side is the sect master of Yuliangism, Kong Yin. Did you come here just for this person, or do you have other plans?" Zhang Yan replied in a serious voice, "Palace Master Yang, you should know that Kong Yin is plotting to attack the mountain and sea realm. Since we are aware of this, we can't just sit around and wait for death. That is why we came here to put an end to this matter." Yang Chuan's eyes flickered. He said, "Fellow Taoist, I'm afraid you don't know this, but Kong Yin is not popular in the Junqian realm. He is a man who does things against the will of the Junqian realm. He relies on his remarkable abilities to force the cultivators of the realm to work for him. Before your side arrived, only the Qi Accumulation Palace was able to hold its ground. Now that he has been defeated, no one will listen to his orders anymore." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "If that is the case, then it is the fortune of our 2 realms." Yang Chuan looked calm and said, "Apart from Kong Yin, the cultivators of the Junqian realm have no intention of going against your side. If possible, The Qi Accumulation Palace is willing to sign a 1,000-year alliance with your side. We will not disturb each other. What does fellow Taoist think? Asking for an alliance was just a test. He wanted to see how the cultivators of the 9 continents felt. If they were willing, that would be for the best. After 1,000 years, his cultivation might be able to advance to the next level. But if they were not willing, then there was a high chance that they would still attack. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This is not a small matter. It cannot be decided in a hurry. We have been fighting for a long time and are tired. It is not convenient for us to stay here any longer. In the future, we will send an envoy here to discuss the details with you." He knew why the other party had said those words just now, but he did not care. The Junshan realm was threatened by a true Yang cultivator. Whether they were willing or not, they would walk the same path as Kong Ying sooner or later. Unless they could find another realm beyond the heavens that was suitable for cultivators to live in, they would have to fight sooner or later. Yang Chuan cupped his hands and said, "Then I will wait for your arrival." Zhang Yan said a few more words to him, then returned to the 9-continent true cultivators and nodded to Sect Leader Qin. Sect Leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and said, "The enemy has been eliminated. Now that the true cultivators have lost much of their vitality, we should not stay in the Junshan realm for long. We will return to the mountain and sea realm now." With that, the great Kuan let out a long roar and a crack suddenly appeared in the sky. Then, clear light shone brightly and rose upward. Not long after, the heaven and earth closed and everything disappeared without a trace. Yang Chuan watched the true cultivators leave and frowned. When he returned to the chariot, Shang Zhou came up and said, "Palace Master, is there something wrong?" Yang Chuan said in a low voice, "The cultivators of the 9 continents want to kill me. Although they have retreated this time, when their vitality recovers, they will definitely come again. The 2 of you will send a message on my behalf. We must invite all the monarchs of the realm. I need them to discuss how to deal with this matter." Chapter 1422. Shang Zhou said, "Kong Ying has already killed or imprisoned the emperors of the inner realm. The people of the Qi Accumulation Palace will not talk about him, but to find all the emperors, we will need the help of the people of Yuliangism. Infinity 8, Infinity 8, Infinity reading Infinity books. O is almost equal to, in fact, the Qi Accumulation Palace also participated in the fight against the emperors of the inner realm, but Kong Ying was already dead, so it was naturally his responsibility. At this moment, the servant outside said, "Palace Master, Emperor Qi of Yuliangism requests an audience." Yang Chuan said calmly, "Isn't he here?" He said, "Please come in for a chat, Emperor Qi." Not long after, Gong Chang's tall figure appeared in the hall. He walked up, bowed to Yang Chuan on the stage and said, "Greetings, Palace Master Yang." He then nodded to Jiang and Shang on both sides, which was considered a greeting. Yang Chuan pointed below, where there was an empty seat, and said, "Fellow Taoist Gong, if you are willing, there is a seat for you here." Gong Chang understood that it was time for him to make a choice. Since he was already here, he was already prepared in his heart. Without any hesitation he said, "Since it is Palace Master Yang's kind intention, Chang will accept it." He walked over with large strides and sat down. Yang Chuan watched him sit down and said, "Fellow Taoist Gong, did you return here because of sect leader Kong's summons?" Gong Chang replied, "My sect has strict rules. Without the order of the sect leader, no one can move freely. Although I heard that there were enemies invading, I did not dare to make a move. After receiving sect leader Kong's order, I came just now." Yang Chuan looked at him and said, "Fellow Taoist Gong is indeed a person who abides by the rules. However, I think that the many rules of Yuliangism are somewhat unreasonable." Gong Chang did not reply. Yang Chuan faintly smiled and continued, "This time, the cultivators of the 9 continents came to invade. Even Cult Master Kong, who had the ability to transcend the heavens, unfortunately died. With such a formidable enemy outside, how can we cultivate in peace? It's just that the enemy is too powerful. If they can come today, They can also come tomorrow. The only way for us, the sovereigns of our world, is to unite as one. Just now we have a chance to fight them. Gong Chang sat there and pondered for a moment, then said, since the cultivators of the 9 continents are extremely difficult to deal with, why not try to negotiate with them? Jiang Kan said coldly, is Emperor Qi willing to open up a cave abode and allow unrelated people to enter to cultivate? If it were me, I definitely wouldn't be willing. Gong Chang chuckled and said, Chang isn't willing either, but if this irrelevant person's strength isn't bad, Chang doesn't mind paying a small price, just to be safe. Yang Chuan said, that makes sense. Now that cult master Kong is dead, what is fellow Taoist Gong's plan? Gong Chang said, with the departure of the cult master, the followers of Yuliangism will definitely be in a mess. If we don't deal with it, they might scatter in all directions. Chang needs to go and pacify them. After I've sorted out the secular affairs of the sect, I'll come and pay a visit to Palace Master Yang. Yang Chuan looked at him deeply, but did not disagree. He only said, since fellow Taoist Gong has something to do, I can't be the bad guy, so I won't keep you here. Gong Chang stood up and bowed. Thank you, Palace Master Yang. After he bowed, he turned around and left. Shang Zhou said, Palace Master, you're letting him go just like that? Yang Chuan said confidently, there's no rush. Now, apart from the Qi accumulation palace, no one can resist the cultivators of the 9 continents. This person will come back. Gong Chang left the Qi accumulation palace and returned to his Dharma carriage. In his heart, he was pondering. Yang Chuan wanted him to join because he valued his personal strength, and also because he wanted him to guard the heaven regions for the Qi accumulation palace to use. Yuliangism previously occupied most of the heaven regions in the Junchen realm that were rich in Ling Qi. Every emperor had their own place to collect Ling Qi. This was something that the Qi accumulation palace could not compare to. However, most of the forces under him were managed by his own family. Many of the heaven regions were controlled by the Gong family. There were too many benefits that he had to protect. If he joined the Qi accumulation palace, he would have to hand over a portion of it. This was something that he was extremely unwilling to do. If the Qi accumulation palace promised not to touch the people under them, he could agree to work for them. Unfortunately, during this visit, Yang Chuan did not mention this. It depends on what Yang Chuan wants. If he speaks nicely, then I'll let it go. I can take a little loss. But if he dares to force me, then I can't. I'll go and rely on the cultivators of the 9 continents. Since he had to rely on others, why couldn't he rely on the cultivators of the 9 continents instead of relying on the Qi accumulation palace? The latter seemed to be a little stronger. Moreover, compared to others, he had one more choice. He was originally from the Green Sky realm, which was the mountain and sea realm. He was not a cultivator of the Junchen realm. Moreover, when he cultivated, he did not need to use Ling Qi. There was no fundamental conflict between him and the cultivators of the 9 continents. As he was thinking, he suddenly felt a familiar divine will. His expression changed and he immediately went to welcome it. In a murky space, he saw a Taoist standing there. The Taoist laughed and said, Guardian Bei, I knew that you would come to find me. Bei Xiangtong was originally in the left heaven region. Kong Ing had been traveling to the right heaven region. Therefore, although he did not stop along the way, he did not make it to the battle. He asked in a deep voice, Guardian Gong, what happened to the sect leader? Gong Chang said, why ask when you already know the answer? The sect leader has been defeated by the cultivators of the 9 continents. I saw it with my own eyes. Bei Xiangtong sighed and said, the death of the sect leader has left behind a mess. Gong Chang chuckled and said, isn't that so? Protector Gu, Protector Ming, and even the sect master have perished in this battle. My brother Gong Zhao's whereabouts are unknown as well. Only I and Protector Bei remain in such a large sect. If no one comes out to preside over the overall situation, then the sect master's painstaking efforts will be wasted. Bei Xiangtong looked at him and said, could it be that Guardian Gong still wants to support Yuliangism? It's not that I'm trying to scare you, but Yang Chuan may not allow me to do this. Gong Chang said, I don't want to go against Yang Chuan, but I can't let the Qi Accumulation Palace get their hands on it so easily. Otherwise, they will not take us seriously. Guardian Bei, have you ever thought that if Yang Chuan gives the birthplace of the pure spirit to someone else, what will you do? Bei Xiangtong did not say a word. He was not willing to give up the birthplace of the pure spirit, but as Gong Chang said, if the Qi Accumulation Palace got their hands on it, he may not be able to keep it safe. Gong Chang continued to agitate. It will be troublesome for me to go against Yang Chuan alone, but if Taoist Bei gets my brother back, we won't have to be afraid of them. There were 4 imperial emperors in the Qi Accumulation Palace, and if there were 3 of them, even if they could not fight them head-on, it would be enough to threaten the heavens of the Qi Accumulation Palace, and they would have the confidence to talk terms with Yang Chuan. Bei Xiangtong didn't agree immediately. After a moment of silence, he said, "Then we can discuss this matter again after Guardian Gong finds Guardian Xiao." With that, his figure flashed and quickly disappeared without a trace. When Gong Chang left, he also returned his divine will. Although he said it heroically, he also understood that it was difficult for him to do it alone, and he had to rescue Gong Chang. Thinking of this, he gathered many disciples and ordered them to go to the various heavens of Yuliangism to appease the followers. Then, he picked up the jade pot from the table. Not long ago, he had actually found some clues, but this time, because the cultivators of the 9 continents broke through the boundary to attack, he did not dare to go too deep. Now that there were no more external matters to disturb him, he could focus on this. After immersing himself in it for a month, he finally found a little inspiration. His expression brightened and he thought to himself, "It should be like this." He used his mana, and the jade pot in his hands suddenly disappeared, turning into bursts of spiritual light, and a small realm gate appeared in front of him. He did not step into it immediately, but tried to see if he could sense Gong Zhao's qi dynamic. If the latter was still alive, then when the realm gate opened, he would be able to sense it, and he would be able to find him. However, not long after, his expression changed slightly. He found that the realm gate was actually slowly fading, as if it was going to return to the jade pot. He could not help but frown. This time, he was able to find the entrance gate because he had been deducing for more than 10 years. If he wanted to find it again next time, it would probably take another 10 years, or even longer. It was fine normally, but it was different now. There were still many things in Yuliangism waiting for him to take care of, and Yang Chuan would not allow him to be free for so long. After weighing the pros and cons, he finally felt that he had to go in and explore. Thus, he raised his finger and drew a line, leaving a letter on the table. Then, he stood up from his seat and strode in. Right at the instant he arrived in the pocket dimension, the door behind him suddenly vanished, and he raised his eyes to look. He noticed a Taoist standing there with his back towards him. His pupils couldn't help but focus as he said, "Who are you?" The Taoist did not turn around, but stood there and said, "Taoist friend Gong Chang, I have waited for you for a long time. Gong Xiao did not go out, so I knew you would definitely come to find him. After all, I did not wait for nothing all these years." In a certain heaven region of the Qi Accumulation Palace, Zhang Yi stood in his own secret room, looking at the 2-realm dial in front of him. At this moment, he had already recovered all of his memories, and his cultivation had increased by another level. Kong Ing had been killed, so his mission here was considered complete. He could dissolve his body at any time and wait for the day when he could return to his origin. However, the matter of the Junshin realm had not been completely resolved, so he could still preserve his body. After a long time, there was a spiritual light on the dial, and there was a blurry figure inside. He bowed and said, "Greetings, enlightened Sima." Sima Quan said, "Enlightened Sima is looking for me?" Zhang Yi nodded and said, "When I was about to leave, the dial sent me a letter. It said that I will have to trouble enlightened Sima to stay in Junshin realm for a while longer." Sima Quan bowed and said, "Enlightened Sima is too serious. Sima is like a fish in water here, and my cultivation and magic power have improved greatly. If I go back and sit here all day, it may not be to my liking." This was not a lie. He had the body of a heavenly devil, and the mountain and sea realm had its own rules, so he could not be impudent. In fact, Junchen realm was the most suitable place for him to use his abilities. Zhang Yi smiled and said, I understand what enlightened Sima means. I will tell my true self about this. However, there is one more thing. After Kong Ying is dead, Yang Chuan will definitely find a way to take over his original power. If enlightened Sima has a way, you can try to stop him. Sima Quan immediately agreed and said, with Kong Ying's death, the Jade of Knowledge will no longer be of any use. The Jade Liang Order is currently in a state of chaos, and even the enlightened master does not speak. I, Sima Quan, intend to take a look around. Chapter 1423. After Sima Quan and Zhang Yi finished their conversation, they noticed that the dual-realm ritual dial's spiritual light had dimmed. They knew that it had been used continuously for a short period of time, causing its spiritual vigor to be greatly depleted. Thinking about it, it would probably take another 10 years to send messages to the 9 continents again. Fortunately, Kong Yin was dead, and the Junchen realm would not change much in the next 100 years. Even if something urgent happened, there was still Zhang Yi who could send messages on his behalf. His eyes flashed, and he thought, what I came down to do is to find a way to make the disciples of Yuliangism work for me. In the past, most of the disciples of Yuliangism had swallowed the knowledge jade. Once he was infected with the demonic poison, he would probably be discovered by Kong Yin, and it would be difficult for him to expand his power. But now, the knowledge jade was useless, and there was no one in the sect who could stop him. If he could incite the majority of the sect to go against the Qi accumulation palace, then even if Yang Chuan could take over the power of Yuliangism in the end, it would take a lot of effort. When the cultivators of the 9 continents broke into the realm, he took advantage of the confusion of the people around him to occupy another body. This person was a cultivator with the surname Huang. His cultivation base and status were not low. After escaping from the Morning Glow heavenly region, he hid on a remote planet with 2 other true monarchs of the Yuliang cult. After waiting for 3 years, they finally received news that the cultivators of the 9 continents had retreated. After a brief discussion with the 2 perfected monarchs, they boarded the chariot and headed towards the main heaven. On the way, they met a disciple under Gong Chang with the surname Lin. When they learned that this emperor was now in the main heaven, they were relieved. At least, the Yuliangism would not disappear for the time being. On the way, they passed by a damaged formation path, and a perfected monarch suggested to repair it. But under everyone's opposition, the matter was left unsettled. Sima Quan did not join in. He knew that it was impossible to succeed. In the past, the formation path was used to make it easier for Yuliangism to rule over the heavens. But now, it was different. The sect master and 2 emperors had died one after another. How could they still have the power to rule over the world? Even if they repaired it, it would only benefit the Qi accumulation palace. Another 3 years passed, and the group finally returned to the Morning Luster heavenly region. They stopped at an undamaged planet. However, just as he was about to corrupt the members of the Jade Liang cult, a clone far away in the depths of the void shuddered and came out of its meditative state. It removed a jade pendant from its body. When he looked at it, he saw that it was faintly trembling and emitting a faint spiritual light. He could not help but focus his gaze. This was the jade letter given by Wanderer Rao. Now that there was movement, it was very likely that this person was calling out to him. Ever since Sanren Rao entered the Jade Pot small world, there had been no news of him. However, Gong Xiao had not come out either. Hence, he had no idea what had happened to him. However, from the looks of it, Gong Xiao was still alive. After waiting here for a month, a ray of light descended from the sky. The moment it landed, the entire planet trembled. When the light dissipated, a Taoist walked out. He looked over and smiled. Taoist Quan Ming, seeing you safe and sound, I'm glad. Sima Quan revealed an excited look. Sanren Rao. Although he had a joyous look on his face, his heart shivered. He discovered that Sanren Rao was different from before. Merely from his aura, he was clearly the same person as before. However, he couldn't tell what the difference was. After thinking for a while, he walked up to Sanren Rao and bowed deeply. Fortunately, Sanren Rao is safe and sound. I've been running around all these years, trying to find a way to continue my demonic sex teachings. However, the All-Heaven Starfield has fallen into the hands of the Yuliang and Qi accumulation families. Even the desolate heaven regions have submitted to us. It's not easy for me to even find a place to stay. It's even more difficult for me to spread my teachings. Sanren Rao, there's a huge change in the world. The leader of Yuliangism, Kong Ing, has been defeated and killed. The powers that were subdued by Yuliangism in the past are all restless. This is an opportunity for my demonic sect to rise. Sanren Rao sighed. It's been hard on all of you. He paused for a moment, then said, I already know about Kong Ing. You're very right. At a time like this, Yuliangism can't even take care of itself. Yang Chuan is busy taking care of the other powers. This is indeed an opportunity for my demonic sect. Sima Quan said regretfully, it's just that we don't know where fellow Taoist Deng is. I've sent him many letters, but I couldn't get in touch with him. Otherwise, we'd have another helping hand. Sanren Rao comforted him. Fellow Taoist Quan Ming, don't worry. The fragrance of true Lord Deng's soul hasn't been extinguished. He's still in this world. He has the jade letter I gave him. It won't be hard to find him. Sima Quan sighed. Then I'm relieved. He thought for a moment and asked, Sanren Rao, how's Gong Xiao? He still had some doubts about how Sanren Rao managed to escape. If the person in front of him was still the same Sanren Rao, once he recognized you as one of his own, he would really treat you as his confidant and wouldn't hide anything. When Sanren Rao heard his question, he sighed. It's a long story. I found my true self in that small world. I borrowed a talisman from that world and was able to subdue Master Xiao. But this person is really impressive. I spent more than 10 years and just now barely managed to suppress him. Sima Quan put on a doubtful expression. Found my true self? Sanren Rao laughed at himself. He pointed at himself and said, I thought I understood myself very well. Who would have thought that all of Yuanying's previous experiences were instilled into me by someone else? What? Sima Quan was slightly shocked. As a heavenly devil, it was easy for him to change a person's thoughts and memories. But Sanren Rao was an emperor. Once he reached the level of mortal metamorphosis, he could sever past karma and transcend beyond the heavens. Even if someone did something to him, he could still see through it. Unless the person who did it had a very high cultivation base, or they were originally from the same source. When he thought of this, he vaguely guessed something. Sanren Rao continued, back then, Kong Ing and Yang Chuan schemed and used 60 years of effort to set up a great formation to trap the dragon god within it. In the end, they killed him. However, the two of them did not know that long before this, the old dragon knew that he could not break through the world gate. Hence, he used a technique passed down by Lord Yuhu to cut off a strand of his spirit and used his own essence qi to shape his body. In the end, he joined the devil sect that did not care about one's background. The more Sima Quan listened, the more shocked he became. Sanren Rao was actually a clone of the old dragon. No wonder Sanren Rao could so easily take over the legacy left behind by the old dragon. Not only did he not encounter any trouble, he even knew the location of the hidden items such as the jade pot. It turned out that the dragon god had purposely left these things for his own family. That old dragon was also very powerful. After escaping with his life, not only did he gain freedom, he also managed to get rid of Kong Ing and Yang Chuan. If not for the cultivators of the 9 continents, he might have been able to reap the benefits in the end. He hesitated and asked, Then how should I address you as Sanren now? Sanren Rao shook his head and said, Fellow Taoist need not worry. I, Rao Jifeng, have been reborn as a human. I am not who I was in the past. I'm just now. Do you understand? Sima Quan subconsciously nodded. What he meant was that everything about the old dragon was in the past. The one standing here today was Sanren Rao. Sanren Rao said, Fellow Taoist Quan Ming, there is still a long way to go. There are some things I will tell you slowly. Come with me to find true Lord Deng first, then we can plan. Sima Quan, however, showed some hesitation. Sanren Rao looked at him and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you have anything else to say?" Sima Quan bowed with a Tao salute. He said, "With Sanren Rao around, the devil sect's prosperity is just around the corner. But if the cultivators from beyond the heavens come again, how should we deal with them?" Sanren Rao said, "I already have a plan. When the time is right, I will explain it to you." In the void essence sea, the 9-continent Taoists were sitting on the back of the giant Kuan, returning to the mountain and sea realm. At this moment, everyone had their eyes closed and were deep in thought. The battle had been extremely dangerous, but they had survived the changes in Kong Yin's past and future. They had learned a lot, which would be very beneficial to their future cultivation. Zhang Yan was also sitting cross-legged and motionless. If one were to talk about who had gained the most, it would definitely be him. With his cultivation, as long as he did not deliberately forget what he had done, he would not forget what he had done. During the battle with him, Kong Yin had dragged him into the heart-illuminating spirit technique. In the void of the past, he had gained a lot of Kong Yin's experience and memories. When the two of them were fighting, he had no time to look at them carefully. Now that he had settled down, he could observe them from time to time. After an unknown amount of time, he came out of meditation. After adjusting his breathing, he was about to enter meditation again. At this moment, he felt sect leader Qin's divine will coming over. Unconsciously, he had a thought and welcomed the divine will. In an instant, he was in the void of the past. Seeing sect leader Qin standing in front of him, he cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader Reverend, did you summon me here for something?" Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "Indeed, I have something to discuss with Hall Master Duzhen. Kong Yin has been killed by us, and the remaining people are no longer a concern. Within 100 years, we should be able to solve this matter. However, the Junchen realm is vast, and there are countless cultivators in it. Even if I get rid of all the monarchs in this realm, as long as the legacy is not lost, there will still be people who can reach this realm. Hallmaster Duzhen, how do you think we should treat this generation?" The Junchen realm had a deep foundation and abundant spiritual opportunity. Within the vast void, who knew how many sects had left their Tao legacies behind? Unless all the people in this realm were killed, it would be impossible to stop this matter. Furthermore, the Junchen realm still had a large amount of pure purple spiritual opportunity that could be harvested. Such an important thing, the cultivators of the 9 continents would definitely not give up on it. In the future, the two realms would inevitably have to deal with each other. Zhang Yan thought for a long time and said, "The Junchen realm still has enough pure purple spiritual opportunity. Even if we spend 10,000 years, it will still be difficult to harvest all of it. If we do not allow this cultivator to harvest it, there will be endless disputes. Furthermore, there are so many talented people in this realm. It would be a pity to give them up. In my opinion, why don't we give them 1 or 2 summoning talismans so that they can compete with each other? The winner can come to our mountain and sea realm to cultivate." Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "This is an imitation of the great realm." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That is correct. If this matter succeeds, the mountain and sea realm will become a great realm, and the Junchen realm will be our lower realm." As for whether this would attract the attention of the great demon Tru Yang, after seeing Kong Yin's divine ability to look into the past, he understood that if such an almighty being entered the Junchen realm, then the existence of the mountain and sea realm would not be able to hide. Fortunately, for the 9 continents, they still had enough time to prepare. After 10,000 years, they might be able to fight against the great demon Tru Yang. Chapter 1424. Mountain and Sea Realm, Floating Heavenly Palace. Inside the main hall, Qi Yuntian was sitting behind a table, flipping through scrolls. Hundreds and thousands of jade scrolls were flying around him. Every moment, a scroll would fall, which would be carefully caught by a half-foot-tall child. Then he would hand it over to the guard outside the hall and send it out. Qinsong School now occupied thousands of times more land than before, and it was still expanding to the north. As the territory expanded, so did the number of disciples. Naturally, The number of things he had to deal with every day had increased. However, as the person in charge of the overall situation, the most important responsibility was to be in charge of the distribution of the various cultivation items. As long as this matter was done well, the four sides of the mountain would be balanced and smooth. Outside the hall, a disciple walked in, bowed from afar, and said, "Hall Master, Jinren-ju requests an audience." Chi Yun-tian did not raise his head, and said, "Summon him up." Not long after, a tall and beautiful young cultivator walked in, kowtowed, and said, "Disciple Zhu Yi greets Master." Chi Yun-dun said, "Stand up and talk." He put down the scroll in his hand, and looked over. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Zhu Yi said respectfully, "Master, there is some progress on the planted spirit shell." He took out a jade box and said, "Master, please take a look." Chi Yun-tian waved his hand, and the jade box came to him. He opened the top cover, and saw 20 pieces of shell neatly placed inside. They were as thin as cicada wings, and sparkled like snow. They looked like they were between plants and living creatures. He picked one up, and with just a thought, it turned into a pure spiritual vigor and was absorbed into his Dharma body. He said, "Is this the blood jade spirit shell that you mentioned?" Zhu Yi said, This item varies from person to person. Sensing spiritual vigor will turn into pure spiritual vigor. Sensing blood chi will give birth to blood power. With this item, you will no longer need to take blood medicine when exchanging with the four regions. In the countries of the eastern wilderness, most of the people at the lower levels used barter, and most of the places used gold and bronze. Among the mystic cultivators, blood medicine was the most expensive. After the 9 continents destroyed the Ming clan and subdued the Heavenly Ghost tribe, they had obtained quite a few of these things. However, after so many years, it was about to be used up. Although he could order the Heavenly Ghost tribe that had surrendered to him to continue to collect more, because the cultivators of the 9 continents absorbed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the blood medicine was not of much use to them. Therefore, they could only use it to exchange with the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland and even the foreign tribes. In the eyes of many sects, these blood medicines were always obtained for free. Even if they were used up, they only needed to inform the sect and there would be Heavenly Ghost servants to refine more for them. Thus, they did not take it seriously. However, Wu didn't share the same sentiments. Virtually all of the surrendered outsider tribes were refining bloodstones. As far as he was concerned, the 9 continents were expending a great deal of manpower and resources, only to gain very little in the end. In fact, the mountain and sea realm savages were the ones benefiting the most. That was why, 10 years ago, he had asked Chi Yun-tian for permission to plant spirit shells in order to change the situation. After looking at it, Chi Yun-tian ordered an attendant in the hall, "Go down and summon a spirit guardian bird that cultivates in the chi and blood magic." The attendant responded, walked out of the main hall, and blew the jade whistle. Not long after, a green-eyed white eagle flew over, landed on the ground, and turned into a handsome boy. He bowed and said, "May I ask what instructions Master has for me?" The attendant said, "Follow me into the hall." As the spirit guardian bird, he was responsible for guarding the floating heavenly palace every day. He knew the rules here, so he didn't dare to look up. He just knelt on the ground and waited for orders. After a while, he heard someone say, "Pick this up." After a while, he heard a voice from above, "Pick this up." He raised his eyes slightly and saw something slowly falling down from above. It was a few pieces of jade shells and he went forward to catch it. The moment it entered his hand, he saw a thread of blood twisting in the shell. After a few breaths, the entire shell turned scarlet red, completely becoming a blood shell. He couldn't help but be startled. Zhu Yi said from the side, "You can try to refine it." White Eagle Boy hesitated for a while. Seeing that there were no other sounds in the hall, he activated his chi and blood force. After a while, the blood shell turned into blood chi and integrated into his body. He felt that his chi and blood chi had a slight improvement, as if he had swallowed blood medicine in the past. Zhu Yi smiled and bowed to the top again. He said, "Master, these blood shells are divided into 5 grades. The higher the grade, the more qi and spiritual vigor it can contain. This jade shell in front of me is of the 3rd grade. If it's the 1st grade spirit shell, Yuanian cultivators can also enjoy it. Qi Yuntian saw it and asked, "How many shell farms have you opened up?" Zhu Yi replied, "There are 9 shell farms along the East Sea coast. They can collect more than 200,000 blood jade shells every month. However, as long as there is enough spiritual vigor and blood qi to irrigate, they can be produced continuously. We only lack manpower now." Qi Yuntian nodded and said, "You've really put in a lot of effort." Zhu Yi bowed and said, "I don't dare to take credit for it. It's because of the cooperation of fellow Taoists from Clear Feather Sect and a few senior brothers who inherited from Taihao School. Just now, I can plant them." Qi Yuntian waved his sleeves and a talisman fell down. He said, "I'll transfer 20 heavenly ghost tribes with a population of 10 million to you. Open up another 1,000 shell farms along the coast. If you do this well, I'll record it as a merit for you." Zhu Yi said happily, "Thank you, Master." At this moment, there was a sound of footsteps outside the hall. He looked back and saw a strong cultivator striding in. His expression turned solemn. He bowed and said, "Greetings, big senior brother." Guan Yingyue nodded to him and then bowed to the seat. He said with a slightly excited tone, "Master, just now, there's a movement on the Tong Tiange, and it's a message of victory." Hearing this, Qi Yintian's expression didn't change at all. He asked in a deep voice, "Can you confirm that it's from the 9 continents?" Guan Yingyue said, "I've checked repeatedly. The message sent by the spiritual message was indeed set by the sect master. Even if someone else obtained the Tong Tiange, it's impossible for them to know about the change." Qi Yuntian nodded. Since it was a message of victory, the result of this battle seemed to be without a doubt. However, as the person in charge, with thousands of disciples behind him, he wouldn't let his guard down just because of this. He thought for a moment and said, "Although there's a movement on the Tong Tiange, it'll be at least a few years before the Venerable Ones return. Inform this matter to the Zenrins of the various mansions and order them to restrain their disciples and prepare to welcome them. But remember, don't let your guard down. If there's any change in the situation, you can escape as soon as possible." Guan Yingyue solemnly said yes, bowed again, and went down to pass on the order. In the clear blue sky, Lu Yeni wore a plain white dress and tied her hair with a silver ring. She sat on a praying mat and smoke curled up from the incense burner in front of her. The clear and gentle water vapor around her rose and fell, running back and forth. There was a sound in the air, like water hitting a stone. At this moment, a supreme sky gue that was placed beside her suddenly shone with a bright light and rose to a height of 10 feet. She opened her eyes wide and thought happily, could it be that Master has sent a message back? She pressed her slender hand, and after a moment, she confirmed that it was indeed from her teacher. "Teacher will come in a few years. I'll tell this news to the junior brothers first." Out of thin air, she condensed 4 flying letters with a few illusory points. With just a press, they turned into spiritual lights and flew in different directions. At this moment, not only Qinsong School, Shaoqing Sect, the 6 sects of Ling Sect also received the message that Zhu Zhen's trip was successful and that he would be returning soon. Once this news spread, the haze that had been pressing on the heads of the various sects since the Zhen's expedition to Junqian world disappeared. After waiting for 3 years, the heaven and earth suddenly shook. Then, the heaven and earth gate opened with a loud bang, and 3 majestic clear lights penetrated into the heaven and earth gate from the outer world. Then, they landed in the sky, and when the lights dispersed, Meng Jida, Ing Chuanxiu, and Shui Dingyuan walked out. The 3 of them had low cultivation, so they first entered the world to appease the various sections. If they had come with Big Kuan, it would probably take a few more years. The 3 of them bowed to each other in the sky, and after a few words, they went their separate ways and headed towards their own sections. After Qi Yuntian sensed Taoist Meng's Qi activity, he ordered a group of people from the heavenly abode to wait in the sect while he brought the protectors of the upper extreme hall, LV Junyang and Qin Nan, out of the upper extreme hall and rode the palace city towards Tianzhong. Not long after, he saw water vapor surging in front of him and rumbling like the Milky Way rushing over. He knew that his teacher had arrived and went forward to welcome him. He bowed from afar and said, "Disciple greets teacher." The water suddenly stopped and Meng Zhen appeared in front of him. He said, "Disciple, you may rise." After the greeting, the three of them welcomed Meng Zhen into the palace. When they were seated, Qi Yuntian asked, "Teacher, when will sect master spiritual master and the other spiritual masters return?" Meng Zhen said, "You don't have to worry. Even though this battle was dangerous, it was fortunate that the arrangements were made beforehand and no one died. Sect Master Spiritual Master, Sect Master Yu, and Hall Master Duzhen all have profound cultivation. It will take a long time to pass through the realm pass and they will only return a few years later." Qi Yuntian said, "So, the Junshan realm is no longer a threat to me?" Meng Zhen stroked his beard and said, "It's not wrong to say that. That Yuliangism cult master has been killed by us. Even though there are still a few imperial emperors left, the strength of the 9 continents is enough to suppress them. We just need to wait for the true essence Qi to recover and we can do this." When he said this, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Now that the danger is over, we can call back those disciples who were sent to the evil realm." Qi Yuntian said, "Teacher, disciple thinks that we can delay this matter." Meng Zhen said, "Are you worried that there will be other changes?" Qi Yuntian said, "It's not that. It's the message from the 2 realms instrument. It said that cultivating in the evil realm, even though the cultivation progress is not fast, it can train the disciple's mind. Therefore, disciple thinks that this is not a bad thing. In the future, if possible, send more disciples to cultivate there. The evil realm was not as rich in spiritual vigor as the mountain and sea realm. One could absorb as much spiritual vigor as one wanted. The amount of spiritual vigor that one could absorb every day was extremely limited. Every mouthful had to be treasured and not a single bit could be lost. As for the rest, they could only use medicinal pills to make up for it. The disciples who cultivated there were very hard. However, cultivating in such a harsh environment could also train people. Just like what he said, if one could persevere here, it was the same as tempering one's spirit and willpower. It would be very beneficial to one's future cultivation. Meng Zhen thought about it and nodded subconsciously. He said, "Then let's do this for now. As for your suggestion, it won't be too late to talk about it after the enemies of the Junshan realm are dealt with." Chapter 1425. Another 5 years passed, and the mountain and sea realm began to shake. The heaven and earth gate was once again pierced through, and clear light poured out as the great rock, Inge, slowly squeezed into the realm. Sect leader Qin, Yu Xianshao, and Zhang Yan stood on the back of the Leviathan, looking out at the boundless lands and seas of the mountain and sea realm. Inwardly they sighed. The divine abilities of mortal shedding cultivators were simply too powerful. With the wave of a hand, they could destroy planets. Thankfully, they were fighting outside of the mountain and sea realm. If they had fought within the mountain and sea realm, things would have been completely different. Sect leader Qin said, "Sect leader Yu, let's talk about Junshin in 3 days." Yu Xianshao agreed. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and bowed to him. After saying their goodbyes, sect leader Qin and Zhang Yan turned into streaks of light and flew toward the floating heavenly palace. At this time, the spiritual masters of the Qinsong school were already waiting below, led by Qi Yuntian. When the 2 of them landed, they all went up to greet them. Lu Yenyi led Tian Kun, Jiang Jing, Wei Zihong, and Yuan Janking up to Zhang Yan. She bowed and said, "Disciple welcomes master back." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. "Dispense with the formalities." Only then did the disciples straighten their backs. After exchanging greetings with the spiritual masters, Zhang Yan said his goodbyes, then called out to the 5 disciples and led them to the Crossing Truth Temple. "Follow me into the realm," he said. He waved his sleeve, and the 5 disciples felt their vision blur. Then, they found themselves on top of a mountain surrounded by clouds and mist. After reaching mortal molting, cultivators didn't need to do anything. The paradise would naturally evolve into a lesser realm, so this place was becoming more and more similar to the outside world. Wei Zihong looked around and said, "Is this the lesser realm opened by Master? The spiritual energy here is much more peaceful than the outside world, but it is also a bit weak." Zhang Yan laughed. Zihong is right. The spiritual qi here is different from the mountain and sea realm. The Junqian realm is exactly like this. Wei Zihong said in surprise, "This realm has existences that even the exalted ones fear. Who would have thought that their spirituality would be inferior to that of the mountain and sea realm?" Zhang Yan said, "The heritage of this world is not as good as the 9 continents, and the spiritual opportunity is slightly inferior as well. However, it has a vast territory, and the number of cultivators is thousands of times more than ours. Therefore, there are many outstanding people here." Lu Yeni and the others did not say anything. They all listened attentively. They could tell that their teacher would not bring them here for no reason. There must be something he wanted to tell them. Zhang Yan continued, "If there are no accidents, there shouldn't be any more twists and turns in the Junqian realm. Master and the few heavenly sages will get rid of the sovereign emperors of this realm. There will definitely be people in the realm who are not inferior to us. In order to suppress them, it will be up to you to deal with them." Lu Yeni looked over and said, "Master wants to borrow the hands of the cultivators of the Junqian realm to train me and my junior brothers?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Although the mountain and sea realm has eliminated all conflicts, there are no battles. For people of your generation, it is too easy. In the future, the cultivators of the Junqian realm will be your opponents. Furthermore, the spiritual qi there is also rich, and there are many pure purple spirit qi. Cultivating there is not necessarily any worse than cultivating in the mountain and sea realm." Lu Yeni and the others immediately understood. Their teacher was encouraging them to go to the mountain and sea realm. On one hand, they could suppress the cultivators of the mountain and train themselves. On the other hand, they could borrow the resources of the outer realm to cultivate. Furthermore, this was equivalent to weakening the strength of the mountain and sea realm. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and a whirlpool appeared in the sky. Then, countless stones and soil gathered in one place. Before long, they formed a star, floating above the land. As he continued to operate the technique, in less than half an hour, there were more than 100 stars in the sky. This was his lesser realm. The yin and yang qi were controlled by him. Coupled with his unparalleled power, changing the sky and earth was a simple matter. It was just that it was not so easy for living things to grow. However, as long as there was enough spiritual qi, this could be ignored for the time being. He said, "The mountains and rivers above are more or less the same as the Junqian realm. You can try to familiarize yourselves with them. In 10 to 20 years, the 9 continents will attack the Junqian realm again. After that, we will need to suppress the sects in the 4 directions. When that time comes, we will need your help." He flicked his finger again and 5 talismans flew into the hands of Lu Yeni and the others. He said, "With this talisman, you can enter and exit this lesser realm at will. As long as you want to be a disciple of the Shenyuan faction, you can bring them in to cultivate. You can do whatever you want here. Even if you destroy the mountains and rivers of the continent, you only need to use the talisman. With Child of Mountain and River here to suppress it, the yin and yang qi will naturally be sorted out." Lu Yeni and the others were delighted and said, "Disciple thanks benefactor for the talismans." After arriving at the grotto heaven, they sparred with others. They were also afraid that they would accidentally destroy the mountains and rivers. Other than going to the virtual sky, they could not display their true abilities normally. Unexpectedly, there were so many benefits in the lesser realm. Naturally, they were delighted. Of course, this was also because Zhang Yan's lesser realm had just been established. Other than the separation of heaven and earth, there was nothing valuable. Even if they caused trouble, it would not be a problem. If it was a place like the White Deer continent, it would have been at least 10,000 years old. Under the nurturing of spiritual vigor, it would have grown many treasures. Zhang Yan took the opportunity to give pointers to the 5 of them before letting them go. However, when he looked around, he saw that Yuan Zhangqing was still standing there. He said, "Disciple, do you have anything to say to me?" Yuan Zhangqing bowed and said, "Benefactor, disciple requests permission to go into closed-door training." Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Although your cultivation level has reached the required level, it is not yet complete. Although it is a little early for you to go into closed-door training, if your Tao heart is right, there is still a chance." He pointed his finger and a spiritual light shot into the center of Yuan Jingqing's brows. He said, "Go." Yuan Zhangqing thanked him and bowed again. Then he held the talisman and left the lesser realm. Zhang Yan sat for a while and took out Kong Yin's Qianquan pouch from his sleeve. With his current status, he did not lack any external objects. He had his own treasures, so there was no need for him to covet others. However, he wanted to take a look and see if this would be related to this person's opportunity to step into the 3rd-degree realm. Just as his mana was about to enter the pouch, it was blocked by a layer of barrier. He knew that although this person was dead, the divine intent that was left in the pouch had not completely dissipated. If one had not reached the level of this person, even if they obtained this item, they would not be able to open it. He smiled and activated the divine intent. In a flash, he appeared in an unknown space. He saw Kong Yin's silhouette standing there, but it was extremely blurry, as if it was about to dissipate. Without saying much, he punched out and instantly shattered Kong Yin's silhouette. As soon as the divine intent was broken, the restriction on the cosmos sac was instantly removed. He used his Fa Li to explore it and saw everything inside clearly. When he saw that there was nothing that could threaten him, he shook his Fa Li and released all of them. The treasures that Kong Yin had brought with him were also inside the pouch. Now that they were released, they wanted to scatter in all directions. However, they were restrained by Lu Ming's mana and had nowhere to run. In the end, they knew that they could not fight back and could only stay where they were. Zhang Yan did not care about these treasures. He reached out and took out a jade scroll. He opened it and saw that it was a Tao technique. Previously, he had some understanding of some of the techniques and techniques of Yuliangism. At this moment, it was not difficult for him to recognize that this was the biography of Xian Qin that was taught to the younger disciples of Yuliangism. It was not some profound Xian technique. However, under the words that were recorded, there were many comments and modifications. Almost every line could be seen. From the handwriting, there was no doubt that the person who wrote this was Kong Yin. He looked at it and understood that Kong Yin was preparing to modify this Tao technique to make it a superior technique. However, in the end, there were still dozens of lines that were not completed. He unconsciously shook his head and put it aside. His gaze swept across the room again. He pushed aside the bottles and instruments and took out another jade scroll. This jade slip was extremely special. There was actually a seal on it. His eyes flashed. He knew that there must be something hidden inside. He placed 2 fingers on the jade slip and gently wiped it. The seal on the jade slip was removed and the true appearance of the room was revealed. He focused and saw that there was a string of eroded characters on the jade scroll. After reading it for a while, he found that it contained a trace of Kong Yin's divine will. It was rare to hide the divine will in the eroded characters. However, it could be seen that this person had copied it based on something. He raised his head and searched seriously once more. In the end, he shook his head. It wasn't that the original object wasn't here, but just the area before him was still extremely valuable, and he could see many profundities from it. Thus, he concentrated his mind and carefully deduced. A few days later, he suddenly felt an enormous strand of divine will descend, and it seemed to want to guide him away. He immediately understood that it was Sect Master Qin who was calling out to him, so he withdrew his consciousness from the divine will and followed Sect Master Qin. In a moment of days, he'd already arrived at that mysterious place, and when he saw Sect Master Qin and Yu Xianxiao were already here, he went forward to greet them. After a short moment, Xue Dingyuan, Meng Zhida, and Ying Chuanxiu arrived successively. When Sect Master Qin saw that everyone had arrived, he said, "Today, I invited all of you here to discuss the unfinished business of the Junqin realm. In this realm, the biggest power is the Qi accumulation palace. They have a total of 4 monarchs. Although the Yuliangism has lost Kong Yin, they still have some strength left. They still have 2 or 3 monarchs. If they work together, they can't be underestimated. Yu Xianshao said calmly, "This person can't be left alive." Sect Master Qin nodded slightly and said, "With the help of the great Kuan Yin, it won't be difficult for us to accomplish this. Although the threat in front of us can be resolved, the threat in the future is still there." He paused, then said in a serious tone, "We can't let our guard down against that true young expert." At this time, Zhang Yan said, "If the monarchs of the Junshan realm feel that they have nowhere else to go, it is very likely that they will leave behind clues about the mountain and sea realm and leak it to that person. If we encounter those who don't care about their own reputation, they might even use it to threaten us. There is no way to guard against that. That person will find out where we are sooner or later." Everyone thought about it carefully and nodded, thinking that it was very likely. If they thought about it in the worst-case scenario, it was even possible that the Yuliangism had made such arrangements in the past. Sect Master Qin said, "Therefore, we need to think about how to deal with that person in the future." Xue Dingyuan said, "Sect Master Qin, do you have a plan?" Sect Master Qin said, "Right now, there are 3 ways. First, if one of us can break through to that level, then we won't have to fear that person. Second, we can only do what Kong Yin did. Before that person arrives, we can go to the Void Primal Sea and find a place for cultivators to live. Then, even if the mountain and sea realm is targeted, we still have a way out." Xue Dingyuan asked again, "What is the last way?" Sect Master Qin's eyes shone slightly and he said, "We can try to find the place where the patriarchs of the sects of the 9 states ascended, and it won't be difficult to resolve this danger." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.